For centuries, humanity has encountered forces that should not exist, weapons that defy the laws of nature, civilizations that vanish without explanation, knowledge that appears far too advanced for its time. But among all of these mysteries, there is one that burns brighter than the rest. A fire that could not be extinguished. A weapon that burned even on water. And a secret so powerful it was erased from history itself. What was it? Who created it? And more importantly, why has no one ever been able to recreate it? Tonight, we begin with a mystery that turned entire seas into flames, a weapon known only as the fire that should not exist, Greek fire. The year is 673 AD. The world stands divided between empires, and at the heart of it all lies one city, Constantinople, a fortress of stone and power. A gateway between continents, a city that had withstood centuries of war, invasion, and collapse. But now, it faced something different, something relentless, something unstoppable. The forces of the Umayyad Caliphate had arrived. Their fleets filled the horizon, their armies stretched beyond sight, and their mission was clear: to bring the Byzantine Empire to its knees. By every logical measure, Constantinople should have fallen. But it didn't, because what happened next should not have been possible. As enemy ships advanced across the water, something strange appeared along the Byzantine defenses. Large bronze tubes mounted on ships. At first they seemed harmless, primitive, almost ceremonial. But then a thick liquid erupted from their mouths, and within seconds the sea itself caught fire. Flames spread across the water like a living organism. Ships ignited instantly. Men leapt into the ocean, only to find the fire following them. Because this was no ordinary fire. Water did not extinguish it. Water fed it. The more they tried to escape, the worse it became. This was the first recorded use of a weapon history would come to fear. A substance later known as Greek fire. Greek fire wasn't just destructive. It was psychological. Imagine facing an enemy weapon that could not be put out with water. Spread uncontrollably, ignited instantly, and appeared almost alive. Accounts from the time describe pure chaos. Entire fleets consumed in minutes. Soldiers abandoning ships in terror. Commanders unable to respond. Some even believed it was supernatural. A divine punishment, a fire sent from the heavens, because nothing in the known world behaved like this. And yet, the Byzantines controlled it perfectly. Historians have spent centuries trying to understand what Greek fire actually was. Some believe it was an early chemical weapon, a mixture of sulfur naphtha, quicklime, highly flammable substances capable of intense combustion. Others suggest it was petroleum-based, a crude oil derivative that could float on water while burning. But here's the problem. Even with modern chemistry, no reconstruction behaves exactly like the historical descriptions, not even close. Because Greek fire didn't just burn, it clung, it spread, and most importantly, it resisted everything. Even more puzzling than the substance itself was how it was used. Historical records describe something extraordinary, a pressurized system, almost like a flamethrower, ships equipped with siphons that could project fire across distances. Think about that for a moment. This was the 7th century, and yet they had something resembling modern incendiary weapons. How? Where did this knowledge come from, and why does it seem so far ahead of its time? The Byzantines didn't just use Greek fire. They protected it. Fiercely. The formula was never written down publicly, never shared, never explained. It was passed only to a small circle of engineers, a closed system, a controlled secret, and over time, that secrecy became absolute. Because if Greek fire fell into enemy hands, it could have changed the balance of power entirely. So they guarded it, until something unexpected happened. As centuries passed, the Byzantine Empire began to weaken. Internal struggles, external pressures, shifting political landscapes, and then, in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople was sacked, the city was looted, its institutions destroyed, its knowledge scattered, and somewhere in that chaos Greek fire vanished, completely. No formula, no blueprint, No surviving documentation, just fragments, hints, and speculation. For centuries, scientists and historians have tried to recreate it. They've tested combinations of oil, resin, sulfur, lime. Some results were impressive, but none matched the original descriptions. Nothing could burn intensely on water, resist extinguishing, spread with such aggression. It's as if something is missing, a key ingredient, or a process that has been completely lost. And this is where the mystery takes a darker turn. Because not everyone believes Greek fire was just chemistry. Some suggest it was based on ancient alchemical knowledge, a lost science passed down through secret traditions. Others go further. They ask, what if Greek fire was not invented, but rediscovered? A fragment of knowledge from a much older civilization, one that understood materials in ways we no longer do. And then there are the most controversial theories, the ones rarely discussed openly. What if Greek fire required something more than ingredients? What if it depended on a specific method, a lost technique, or knowledge deliberately erased? Because if such a weapon existed once and could be recreated today, what would stop it from being used again? The truth is, we don't know what Greek fire really was. We don't know how it worked, and we don't know why its secret disappeared so completely. But perhaps the most unsettling question is this: was it truly lost, or was it hidden, buried intentionally to ensure that something so destructive would never return? Because history has a pattern. It reveals and it conceals. And sometimes the most dangerous knowledge isn't destroyed. It's simply removed, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The land that history forgot. What if history got it wrong? What if one of the greatest discoveries in human exploration was made centuries before it was supposed to happen? A land reached long before Columbus, a settlement built and then mysteriously abandoned, a story recorded yet somehow dismissed as myth. But what if it wasn't a myth? What if an entire chapter of history was lost, hidden between legend and truth, buried beneath cold winds and silent shores, and waiting to be uncovered? Tonight we follow a trail left behind by explorers who sailed into the unknown and may have discovered a new world, only to vanish from it. The North Atlantic, a place of unforgiving waters, endless gray skies, and waves that have swallowed countless ships whole. This is not a place for ordinary journeys, and yet, over 1,000 years ago, small wooden vessels cut through these waters, carrying men who were not just explorers, but risk-takers, survivors, and in many ways something more. They came from the harsh lands of Scandinavia, a people known to history as the Vikings. Among them was a figure whose name would echo through time, Leif Erikson. According to ancient Norse texts, Leif sailed west from Greenland into unknown territory, far beyond the edges of their known world. What he found was unlike anything they had seen before. A land of forests, rich soil, wild resources, a place they would call Vinland. For centuries, the story was dismissed as legend, a tale exaggerated through oral tradition. But then, something changed. In the 1960s, archaeologists made a discovery that stunned the world. At the northern tip of Newfoundland, they uncovered something extraordinary: Lonsok's Meadows, the remains of a Norse settlement, structures built in unmistakable Viking style, tools, artifacts, evidence, proof that Vikings had reached North America. Nearly 500 years before Columbus, history had to be rewritten. But this discovery didn't solve the mystery. It deepened it. Because if the Vikings had discovered such a land, why didn't they stay? Why didn't they expand? Why didn't this discovery change the course of history? Instead, they left, and whatever they built disappeared. The most widely accepted explanation is simple: conflict. The Norse texts speak of encounters with indigenous people, referred to as skrælings. These encounters were described as hostile, unpredictable, violent. According to this theory, the Viking settlers were outnumbered, outmatched, and ultimately forced to retreat. It makes sense. But it doesn't explain everything. Because the Vikings were not strangers to conflict. They had built settlements across Europe, fought wars, established trade routes, so why would this be different? Another explanation points to nature itself. The North Atlantic climate is brutal. Winters are long. Resources become scarce. Isolation becomes dangerous. Maintaining a distant colony would have required constant supply lines, stable population, long-term planning, and perhaps Vinland was simply too far, too difficult, too isolated. But again, this raises more questions than answers. Because the land described in the sagas was not barren, it was rich, abundant, full of opportunity. So why abandon something so valuable? Much of what we know comes from the Vinland sagas, ancient texts passed down through generations. But here's the issue. They don't agree. Details vary. Events shift. Descriptions change. Some accounts describe peaceful settlement. Others describe chaos. Some suggest brief visits. Others imply longer occupation. It's as if we're looking at fragments of a much larger story, one we don't fully understand, and then there's something even more intriguing. Because Los Opomatos might not be the only site, some researchers believe it was just a base, a temporary outpost, not the true Vinland. There are theories suggesting additional settlements further south, hidden camps yet to be discovered, a much larger Viking presence. Could it be that we've only found a small piece of the puzzle? In recent years, new discoveries have reignited the mystery. On Baffin Island, researchers have found unusual textiles, metal fragments, signs of European activity. Some believe these could be evidence of extended Viking presence. Not just a single expedition, but repeated contact, trade, exploration, possibly even integration. But nothing is definitive, not yet. And this is where the story takes a more unsettling turn, because some believe the Vikings didn't leave because they failed, but because they encountered something unexpected, something that made them abandon the land entirely. There are whispers in the sagas, strange details, descriptions that don't quite fit. Some interpret these as exaggerations, others as something else. What if the Vikings found something they couldn't explain, something that made Vinland not worth staying in? Even the name Vinland is debated. Traditionally, it's thought to mean land of grapes, but grapes don't grow in Newfoundland. So what does it really mean? Some suggest it referred to meadows, not grapes. It described a broader region, or it symbolized abundance. But what if the name itself is misleading? A translation lost in time, a clue we've misunderstood. If the Vikings truly reached North America, why didn't this knowledge spread? Why didn't Europe know? Why didn't it change maps, trade, or exploration? It's as if the discovery was forgotten, or ignored, or erased. Some theories suggest the Vikings didn't just visit once, but returned multiple times. Small groups, seasonal voyages, temporary settlements. If true, there could be more sites, hidden, buried, waiting. But after centuries of searching, we've only found one confirmed location. Why? Was Vinland a short-lived experiment, a failed colony, or something more complex? Did the Vikings leave because they had to, or because they chose to? And if they chose to leave, what made them walk away from a new world? Woolwich closing loop. History often tells us where people went, but it rarely tells us why they left. And sometimes, the absence of answers is the greatest clue of all. Because somewhere beyond the cold Atlantic, beneath layers of earth and time, there may still be traces of a land discovered too early, a story forgotten too soon, and a mystery that refuses to stay buried. The city that should not exist. Some cities are lost to time, buried beneath sand, swallowed by oceans, forgotten by history. But some were never meant to be found at all. A city of gold, hidden deep within one of the harshest environments on Earth. A place described as impossibly rich, yet impossibly unreachable. For centuries, explorers searched for it. Some claimed they came close, others vanished trying, and all of them returned with the same question. Was it ever real, or was it something else entirely? A mirage, a myth, or a secret deliberately hidden from the world? Tonight, we step into the vast emptiness of the desert in search of a place that may not want to be discovered, a place known only as Zerzura, the Sahara Desert, an endless ocean of sand. Waves of dunes stretch beyond the horizon, shifting constantly, erasing footprints, swallowing paths, hiding everything beneath them. Temperatures soar beyond human limits during the day. At night, they plunge into freezing silence. It is a place where survival itself is uncertain. And yet, for over 1,000 years, stories have emerged from this unforgiving landscape, stories of something impossible, a hidden city, not ruined, not abandoned, but preserved, untouched, waiting. The earliest accounts come from medieval Arabic explorers. Among them was al-Masudi, a scholar known for documenting the unknown regions of the world. In his writings, he describes something extraordinary, a city deep within the desert, a place filled with wealth beyond imagination, a place that defied the natural laws of its surroundings. According to these accounts, Zerzura was not just a city, it was an oasis unlike any other. Imagine this, in the middle of one of the driest regions on Earth, a city surrounded by greenery, flowing water, fertile land, lush vegetation. A place where life thrived, in a landscape where life should not exist at all. But that wasn't the strangest part, because Zerzura was said to hold something far more valuable than water or land. It held gold, not small amounts, but vast, unimaginable reserves, treasures untouched, protected, hidden. As more accounts surfaced, the descriptions became even more unusual. Some claimed the city was guarded, not by armies, but by something unknown, story and spoke of, silent watchers, hidden forces, beings that protected the city from intruders. Others described something even more unsettling. They claimed the people of Zerzura did not age, that they lived far longer than normal, that time itself behaved differently within its walls. Were these exaggerations, or were they clues to something deeper? One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Zerzura is where it actually is. Different sources place it in completely different regions: Western Egypt, Eastern Libya, deep Central Sahara. Every account agrees on one thing: it is hidden, not just difficult to find, but deliberately concealed, almost as if the desert itself is protecting it. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, explorers became obsessed with finding Zerzura. Among them were European adventurers who ventured deep into the Sahara, risking everything. Some claimed they found ruins, fragments of structures buried beneath sand. Others reported strange formations, unnatural shapes, but no one ever found the city itself. No walls, no gold, no definitive proof, only more questions. The most widely accepted explanation is simple: Zerzura never existed. It was a myth, a story exaggerated over time, possibly based on small oasis settlements, misinterpretations of geography, travelers' tales distorted through retelling. In this view, Zerzura is not a real place, but a symbol, a dream, the idea of paradise in the harshest environment imaginable. And yet, this explanation feels incomplete, because the consistency of the accounts is difficult to ignore. Across centuries, different cultures, different explorers, the same core elements appear: a hidden city, vast wealth, an isolated fertile region, a sense of protection or concealment. How does the same story appear repeatedly, without a source? Coincidence, or something else? Some researchers believe Zerzura could be the remains of an ancient civilization, one that existed when the Sahara was not a desert. Thousands of years ago, this region was green, filled with lakes, rivers, and life. What if Zerzura was once part of that world, a city that survived even as the environment around it changed? If so, how did it remain hidden for so long? Another possibility suggests Zerzura isn't above ground at all, but beneath it, buried under layers of sand and time, protected not by walls, but by the desert itself. Satellite imagery has revealed strange formations beneath the Sahara, hidden structures, unexplained patterns, but none have been confirmed as Zerzura, at least not yet. And then there are the more unsettling ideas. What if Zerzura is not lost, but hidden intentionally? A city protected, concealed, kept out of reach. Some theories suggest it could have been a repository of knowledge, a sanctuary for a select group, a place designed to remain undiscovered. If that's true, then the real question isn't where Zura is, but why it was hidden. There's something else to consider. Every civilization has myths, but myths often originate from truth, distorted over time, but rooted in something real. So what was Zerzura originally? A city, an oasis, or something entirely different? Even today, explorers continue to search for Zerzura, using satellite technology, advanced mapping systems, archaeological surveys, and yet nothing definitive has been found. It's as if the city doesn't want to be located. Why does the legend persist? Why do so many accounts describe the same place? And why, after centuries of searching, has no one been able to prove or disprove it? Because usually, mysteries fade over time, but this one hasn't. It remains, unchanged, unresolved. Somewhere beneath the shifting sands of the Sahara, there may be something waiting, a city lost or hidden, a truth buried so deeply that even time itself cannot reveal it. And perhaps that's exactly the point. Because not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to remain just beyond reach, close enough to chase, but never close enough to find. The civilization that vanished the jungle does not forget. It grows, it consumes, it erases, stone by stone, road by road, memory by memory. It reclaims everything. And yet, beneath the dense green canopy of Central America, something remains. Cities, massive, intricate, and once alive with millions of people, now silent, abandoned, frozen in time. For centuries, these cities stood at the center of one of the most advanced civilizations the world had ever seen, a people who understood mathematics with astonishing precision, who tracked the movements of the stars with near-perfect accuracy, who built towering pyramids that still rise above the jungle today. And then, they disappeared. Not overnight, not in a single catastrophic moment, but slowly, quietly, completely. So what happened? What force could bring down an entire civilization that seemed so advanced, so powerful, so enduring? And why, even now, do we still not have a clear answer? Deep within what is now modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, the remains of the ancient Maya civilization lie hidden beneath layers of vegetation. At its peak, around the 8th century, the Maya world was thriving. Cities like Tikal rose above the forest, their temples piercing the sky. In Copan, intricate carvings told stories of rulers, wars, and celestial events. And in Palenque, architecture reached levels of sophistication that still impress modern engineers. This was not a primitive society. This was a network of powerful city-states, connected through trade, bound by shared culture, driven by complex political and religious systems. The Maya built roads stretching for miles. They developed one of the only fully realized writing systems in the ancient Americas. They calculated time with astonishing accuracy, creating calendars that tracked cycles far beyond a human lifetime. By every measurable standard, they were thriving. And then something began to change. At first, it was subtle. Inscriptions became less frequent. Construction slowed, trade networks weakened, and then the cities began to empty. One by one, temples were left unfinished. Plazas fell silent. Entire populations vanished into the surrounding jungle. By the end of the 9th century, many of the great southern cities had been abandoned, completely. No mass graves suggesting sudden catastrophe, no evidence of a single devastating invasion, no clear sign of what caused the collapse. Just absence and silence. The most widely accepted explanation begins with something deceptively simple: the environment. The Maya relied heavily on agriculture. They cleared vast areas of forest to build cities and grow crops. Over time, this deforestation may have led to soil depletion. Nutrients drained, crop yields declined, and as the land weakened, so did the society built upon it. At the same time, evidence suggests that the region experienced prolonged droughts, severe, sustained periods without rain. Water reservoirs dried up, food became scarce, and the delicate balance that sustained millions of people began to collapse. It sounds logical, almost inevitable. But there's a problem. This explanation doesn't fit the full picture, because the collapse wasn't uniform. Some cities fell quickly, others survived for generations longer, and some, like Chichen Itza, continued to thrive long after others had been abandoned. If environmental collapse was the sole cause, why such uneven outcomes? Why did some regions adapt while others failed? This is where the mystery deepens, because environmental stress alone doesn't explain the political instability that appears in the archaeological record. The Maya world was not a single empire. It was a network of competing city-states, each ruled by its own elite class, each engaged in alliances, rivalries, and warfare. As resources became scarce, competition would have intensified. Conflicts may have escalated. Trade routes disrupted. Power structures weakened. Some inscriptions suggest increasing warfare during the final years. Captured rulers. Destroyed cities. Shifting alliances. Could internal conflict have accelerated the collapse? Could the Maya have contributed to their own downfall? Even this, however, feels incomplete, because societies have faced war before and survived. So what made this different? Some researchers believe the answer lies not just in physical survival, but in belief. The Maya world was deeply tied to religion. Rulers were not just political leaders, they were intermediaries between the people and the gods. Their authority depended on maintaining cosmic order, on ensuring that the cycles of time, nature, and life continued uninterrupted. But what happens when those cycles begin to fail? When drought strikes, when crops fail, when the heavens no longer behave as expected? Could it be that the people began to lose faith? That the rulers once seen as divine were no longer trusted? If the belief system collapsed, the entire structure of society could collapse with it, not through violence, but through abandonment. People leaving cities, walking away, searching for something else, something new. And then there are the more unsettling possibilities, the ones that move beyond environment, politics, and belief. Some suggest that disease may have played a role. Epidemics spreading through densely populated cities, awakening populations, disrupting social order, but evidence for widespread disease remains limited. Others look to external forces, unknown contacts, influences we do not yet fully understand. These ideas remain speculative, but they persist, because the mystery refuses to settle into a single explanation. There is also a question that is often overlooked. Did the Maya actually disappear, or did they simply change? Because even today, millions of Maya descendants still live in the region. Their languages survive. Their traditions continue. Their identity endures. So perhaps the collapse was not an ending, but a transformation. The cities were abandoned, but the people remained, adapting, moving, reshaping their world in ways we are only beginning to understand. And yet, that still leaves one final question. Why abandon the cities? Why leave behind such monumental achievements? Structures that took generations to build, systems that defined an entire civilization. Why walk away from all of it? Because abandonment is not a simple decision. It is a last resort, a response to something overwhelming, something that makes staying impossible. And whatever that was, we still don't fully understand it. Even with modern technology, new discoveries continue to raise more questions. LiDAR scans have revealed vast hidden networks beneath the jungle. Roads, terraces, entire urban landscapes previously invisible. The scale of the Maya civilization is far greater than once believed, which makes its collapse even more difficult to explain. Because the larger the system, the more resilient it should be. And yet, it fell, or changed, or dissolved, in ways that remain unclear. Standing among the ruins today, there's a strange feeling, not just of loss, but of interruption, as if something was left unfinished, as if the story stopped mid-sentence, and no one ever returned to complete it. The stones remain, the carvings endure, but the voices are gone, and in their absence the questions grow louder. Was it drought, war, belief, disease, or something else entirely? Something we haven't yet considered, something hidden within the gaps of history. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are not about what we find, but about what we cannot explain. And the Maya remain one of the most powerful examples of that truth. A civilization that reached incredible heights and then stepped back into the shadows, leaving behind only fragments, and a question that continues to echo through time. What really happened? The knowledge that was erased. There are moments in history when humanity stands on the edge of something extraordinary, moments when knowledge begins to accumulate, when ideas collide, when discovery accelerates beyond anything seen before. And then, sometimes, it all disappears, not gradually, not naturally, but suddenly, violently, as if something too powerful was never meant to survive. In the heart of the ancient world, there once existed a place unlike any other, a center of learning so vast, so ambitious, that it sought to collect all knowledge known to humanity. A place where scholars from different cultures, languages, and beliefs came together, not to conquer, but to understand. It was called the House of Wisdom, and what was lost there may have changed the course of history forever. In the 9th century, the city of Baghdad stood as one of the greatest intellectual centers in the world. It was not just a city. It was a crossroads, a place where ideas traveled faster than armies, where knowledge moved across borders carried by scholars, traders, and translators. At the center of this intellectual explosion stood the House of Wisdom. But this was no ordinary library. It was something far more ambitious. A place dedicated not only to preserving knowledge, but expanding it. Within its walls, texts from ancient civilizations were gathered. Greek philosophy, Persian science, Indian mathematics, Chinese innovations, all translated into Arabic, all studied, debated, and improved upon. Scholars worked tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the past, to understand the universe, to push the boundaries of what was known, and in doing so, they created something extraordinary. Among those who walked its halls was Al-Khwarizmi, a man whose work would lay the foundation for algebra, a system of mathematics that still shapes the modern world. There was also Ibn al-Haytham, whose studies of light and vision would revolutionize science centuries later. These were not isolated thinkers, they were part of something larger, a network of minds working together, building upon each other's ideas, advancing knowledge at a pace rarely seen in history. But the true power of the House of Wisdom was not just what it contained, it was what it represented, a belief that knowledge should be shared, expanded, preserved, that the past held answers and the future depended on understanding them. For a time, this belief thrived. And then, it was destroyed. In the year 1258, the Mongol Empire advanced toward Baghdad, led by Hulagu Khan. Their reputation preceded them. Cities burned, civilizations collapsed, resistance was futile. And when they reached Baghdad, what followed was not just conquest, it was devastation. The city fell, and with it, the House of Wisdom. Accounts describe unimaginable destruction. Libraries burned, scholars killed, manuscripts thrown into the river. So many books were cast into the Tigris that it is said the water turned black with ink. Whether literal or symbolic, the meaning is clear. Knowledge was lost, not slowly, not accidentally, but all at once. Thousands of years of accumulated understanding, gone. Works of philosophy, science, medicine, mathematics, destroyed or scattered beyond recovery. Ideas that may have taken centuries to rediscover, erased in a matter of days. And yet, here is where the mystery begins, because we don't fully know what was lost. Some texts survived, fragments, translations, copies that had already spread to other regions. But the full extent of the knowledge housed within the House of Wisdom remains unknown. And that uncertainty is what makes this loss so profound. What if there were discoveries that never reached us? Mathematical insights ahead of their time, medical knowledge that could have changed history, philosophical ideas that might have reshaped entire civilizations. What if something critical was lost in those flames? There are theories that not everything was destroyed, that some scholars anticipating the invasion may have hidden manuscripts, smuggled them out, preserved them in secret. If true, then fragments of this lost knowledge may still exist, somewhere, hidden in private collections, buried in forgotten archives, waiting. Others suggest that parts of this knowledge did survive, but were never recognized for what they were, that certain ideas entered Europe during the Renaissance without clear understanding of their origin, that what we consider rediscovery may actually be inheritance, fragments of a legacy that was never fully understood. And then there are more controversial possibilities. What if some of the knowledge was intentionally concealed, not destroyed, but hidden, because it was too powerful, too disruptive, too dangerous to be allowed to spread? It's an uncomfortable thought. But history has shown that knowledge can be controlled, restricted, suppressed, not always lost by accident, sometimes lost by design. The destruction of the House of Wisdom is often seen as a tragic moment, and it was. But it also raises a deeper question. Why was so much knowledge concentrated in one place? Why did a single event have the power to erase so much? Was it a strength or a vulnerability? Because when knowledge is centralized, it becomes fragile, dependent, exposed, and when it falls, everything falls with it. Even today, we are still uncovering fragments of ancient knowledge. Texts hidden in monasteries, manuscripts preserved in unlikely places, clues that suggest we may not know as much as we think we do. The legacy of the House of Wisdom is not just what it achieved, but what it lost. A reminder that progress is not always linear, that civilizations can advance and then regress, that knowledge can grow and then vanish. And perhaps the most haunting question of all is this: what would the world look like today if that knowledge had survived? Would science have advanced faster? Would medicine have evolved differently? Would entire centuries of discovery have been unnecessary? Or would something else have changed? Something deeper, something more fundamental. Because knowledge does more than inform. It shapes, it defines, it determines the direction of human history. And when it is lost, that direction changes. Standing in the shadow of what once was, we are left with fragments, echoes, pieces of a puzzle we may never fully reconstruct. The House of Wisdom is gone, but its absence remains. A gap in history, a silence where knowledge once thrived, and somewhere within that silence, there may still be answers, waiting to be found, or perhaps waiting to remain hidden. Because sometimes the greatest mystery is not what we know, but what we've lost. The King Ver existed throughout history. There have been rulers who shaped the world, kings who built empires, leaders who commanded armies, figures whose names became impossible to forget. But what happens when a king is remembered everywhere, yet never truly found? A ruler described in countless accounts, a kingdom said to be vast, wealthy, and powerful, a land filled with wonders beyond imagination, and yet no map could locate it. No expedition could reach it. No proof could confirm it. For centuries, this king was believed to be real, not just a myth, not just a story, but a living ruler waiting somewhere beyond the known world. His name was Prester John, and his kingdom may have been the greatest illusion in history. The story begins in the 12th century, a time of conflict, a time of expansion, a time when Europe looked outward, searching for allies, answers, and opportunity. During this period, rumors began to spread, stories carried by travelers, merchants, and pilgrims, whispers of a distant Christian king, a ruler who governed a vast and powerful empire somewhere in the east. According to these accounts, this king was unlike any other, wise, just, incredibly wealthy, and most importantly, he was Christian. In a world divided by religion and war, this mattered because Europe was locked in conflict with powerful Islamic empires, and the idea of a hidden Christian ally was more than hopeful. It was strategic. Then came the letter. a document that would ignite centuries of fascination, a message supposedly written by Prester John himself, addressed to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel the Komnenos. The letter described a kingdom beyond imagination, a land filled with gold and precious stones, exotic animals, rivers that flowed with riches, cities built with impossible beauty. It spoke of armies so vast they could not be counted, of power beyond anything known in Europe, and at the center of it all, a king who ruled with divine authority. The letter spread rapidly, copied, shared, believed, because it offered something people desperately wanted to believe. That somewhere out there was a kingdom that could change everything. But there was one problem. No one knew where it was. Some believed it lay in Asia, beyond the lands of Persia, hidden somewhere near India or even further east. Others believed it was in Africa, possibly in the highlands of Ethiopia. A Christian kingdom already known to exist, each theory seemed plausible. Each location seemed possible. And yet, every expedition returned with the same result. Nothing. The search for Prester John became an obsession. Explorers set out across continents, crossing deserts, sailing unknown seas, risking everything, all in pursuit of a kingdom that refused to be found. And still, the stories continued, growing more elaborate over time. Descriptions of the kingdom became increasingly fantastical. Some accounts claimed the land contained rivers of gold, creatures unlike anything seen before, people who lived in perfect harmony. Others suggested that Prester John possessed extraordinary abilities, that he could heal the sick, perform miracles, command nature itself. At some point, the line between reality and imagination began to blur. Historians today often suggest that Prester John was never real, that the letter was a fabrication, a piece of medieval propaganda, designed to inspire hope or manipulate belief. But even this explanation raises questions, because the story persisted for centuries, across different cultures, across different regions. Why would a single fabricated story last so long? Why would so many people believe it? One theory suggests that Prester John was not a single person, but a misunderstanding, a distorted interpretation of real rulers. Some believe the legend may have originated from encounters with Eastern Christian communities, groups that existed beyond Europe's borders, whose leaders were misidentified or exaggerated over time. Others point to the Mongol Empire. At its peak, it stretched across vast territories. There were moments when Europeans believed the Mongols might be allies. Could Prester John have been a misinterpretation of a Mongol ruler, a rumor that evolved into something far greater? And then there is Ethiopia, a Christian kingdom that did exist. For centuries, European explorers believed they had finally found Prester John there. But the reality never matched the legend. The kingdom was real, but it was not the mythical empire described in the stories. So the question remains, why did the legend endure? Because Prester John represented more than a king. He represented hope, a belief that somewhere there was a solution, an ally, a force that could shift the balance of power. In uncertain times, people search for certainty, and sometimes they create it. But there is another possibility, one that is rarely considered. What if the legend of Prester John was not entirely false? What if it was based on something real, but misunderstood, distorted through translation, exaggerated through retelling, lost in the gaps between cultures and languages? Because history is not always recorded clearly. It is shaped by perception, by interpretation, by the limits of what people understand at the time. Could there have been a powerful ruler whose story was transformed into legend? A kingdom that existed, but was never properly documented, a truth hidden beneath layers of myth. Even today, the mystery remains unresolved. No definitive answer. No confirmed location. No confirmed location. Prester John exists in a strange space, between history and imagination, between fact and fiction, a figure who may never have lived, yet influenced real decisions, real journeys, real history, because the search for him changed the world. It pushed explorers further, encouraged discovery, inspired movement across continents. In some ways, it helped shape the age of exploration itself. And yet, at the center of it all, there is nothing. No kingdom, no throne, no king, or perhaps just no proof. Because absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Somewhere in the vast stretches of history, there may have been something, a fragment of truth, a real story, lost beneath centuries of speculation. Or perhaps Prester John was never meant to be found, because his true purpose was not to exist, but to be believed, a symbol, a possibility, an idea powerful enough to move entire civilizations. And in that sense, perhaps he was real after all. Because even today, we are still asking the same question. Was he a king or a creation? And the answer remains just out of reach. The churches carved from Worth High in the rugged mountains of East Africa. There exists something that should not be possible. Not built, not assembled, not constructed in any traditional sense, but carved, cut directly into solid rock, as if the earth itself had been shaped by human hands. 12 massive structures, hidden below ground level, perfectly aligned, impossibly precise, and surrounded by a question that has never been fully answered: how? In the highlands of Ethiopia, in a place known as Lalibela, there stands one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements in human history. And yet, the deeper you look at it, the less it makes sense. From above, the landscape appears unremarkable. Stone, dust, terrain shaped by time, but hidden beneath the surface lies an entire complex. Churches not built upward, but downward, carved into the ground from a single block of rock, each one monolithic, each one unique, each one defying the limits of what should have been possible at the time. Among them stands the most iconic structure, Bete Georgis, a perfectly shaped cross, cut into the earth with astonishing symmetry. Its walls drop vertically into a trench, its roof sits level with the ground above, and its form remains almost flawless, even by modern standards. According to tradition, these churches were commissioned by a king, a ruler known as King Lalibela, who is said to have envisioned a new Jerusalem, a sacred place that would replicate the holy sites of the Middle East. But here's where the story becomes difficult to accept, because these structures were not built in the way cities are built. They were not assembled piece by piece. They were carved from top to bottom, removing tons of solid rock, with tools that were extremely limited. Think about that. To create even one of these churches, workers would have had to outline the structure from above, cut vertically downward into solid rock, remove massive amounts of stone, then carve the interior, all while maintaining symmetry, precision, and structural integrity. Now multiply that by 12. The official explanation is simple: time, labor, dedication. Historians believe thousands of workers may have spent decades, possibly generations, carving these structures, using basic tools, hammers, chisels, manual effort. And while this explanation is possible, it leaves many questions unanswered, because the level of precision is extraordinary. Angles are sharp, lines are consistent, details are intricate. Even today, replicating something like this would require advanced planning and engineering. So, how did they achieve it then? There are features that make the mystery even deeper. Underground tunnels connect the churches, narrow passageways carved with intention, not randomly, but with design. Some pathways lead to hidden chambers, others align in ways that suggest planning beyond simple construction. This was not just carving, this was architecture. And then there is the question of layout. The entire complex appears to follow a pattern. Some believe it mirrors the layout of Jerusalem. Others suggest it aligns with celestial or symbolic systems. But no single theory explains everything. Local traditions offer a different perspective, one that moves beyond logic. According to legend, the churches were not built by humans alone, but with the help of angels. That during the night, when human workers rested, something else continued the work. accelerating the process, completing what would have taken decades in a fraction of the time. It sounds like myth, and it probably is. But myths often emerge when reality becomes difficult to explain. There are also theories suggesting lost techniques, methods of stone cutting that have not survived, knowledge passed down and then forgotten. Because throughout history, there are examples of construction methods we still don't fully understand, techniques that seem ahead of their time. Could Lalibela be one of those cases? A project built using knowledge that no longer exists. Some researchers have even proposed more unconventional ideas, that sound and vibration may have played a role, that certain frequencies could weaken stone, making it easier to carve. There is no concrete evidence for this, but the idea persists. Because the alternative is difficult to fully explain. Then there is the scale of effort. Even with thousands of workers, even with decades of labor, the coordination required would have been immense. Planning, execution, consistency. This was not random, this was intentional. And yet, we have no detailed records explaining how it was done. No manuals, no step-by-step accounts, just the result and the mystery. But perhaps the most important question is not how they were built, but why. Why carve churches into the earth? Why not build upward like other civilizations? Why choose a method that is far more difficult, far more time-consuming, far more demanding? Some believe it was symbolic. That carving into the earth represented humility, a connection to the ground, to creation, to something deeper. Others suggest it was strategic, that underground structures were more protected, less visible, more resilient. But there may be another reason, one that we don't fully understand. Because the churches of Lalibela are not just structures. They are experiences. To enter them, you descend, you move downward, away from the surface, into something enclosed, something quiet, something removed from the outside world. It creates a feeling, a shift, as if the space itself was designed to change perception, to create an environment that goes beyond architecture. And that raises a deeper question. Were these churches built only for worship, or for something more? Because throughout history, certain structures have served multiple purposes: spiritual, symbolic, functional, and sometimes hidden. Even today, the churches of Lalibela remain active. Pilgrims visit. Rituals continue. The space is still alive, still used, still respected. But the mystery has not faded. If anything, it has grown. Because modern technology has given us new tools, new ways to analyze, new ways to measure. And yet, the core questions remain. How were they built? Why were they built this way? And what knowledge was used that we no longer possess? Standing above Lalibela, looking down into structures carved from solid rock, there is a strange realization. This should not exist. Not like this, not with that level of precision, not with that method. And yet, it does. Which leaves us with a possibility that ancient civilizations may have understood more than we think, not in the way we imagine, not in the sense of advanced machines or technology, but in methods, techniques, approaches to problem solving that we have since lost, or perhaps something else entirely. Because some mysteries are not just about the past, they are about the limits of our understanding. And Lalibela sits right at that edge, a place where explanation begins and certainty ends, a place carved from earth, but filled with questions. And perhaps that is exactly what it was meant to be, not just a monument, but a mystery, one that remains unfinished. The library that disappeared. There are places in history where knowledge didn't just exist, it gathered, it expanded, it multiplied, places where ideas were not only preserved, but transformed. And among all of them, there was one that stood above the rest, a place so ambitious that it sought to collect all human knowledge in one location. Every philosophy, every discovery, every piece of understanding the ancient world had to offer, and then it vanished. Not completely, not instantly, but slowly, fragment by fragment, until all that remained was a question. What happened to the greatest library ever built? On the Mediterranean coast of Alexandria, there once stood a center of learning unlike anything before or since. The Library of Alexandria. But this was not just a building filled with scrolls. It was an idea, a mission, an attempt to understand everything. Founded during the reign of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the library became a magnet for scholars from across the ancient world. Greece, Egypt, Persia, India. They came not just to read, but to contribute, to question, to challenge what was known. At its height, the library is believed to have housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Some estimates suggest even more. Works of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature. Knowledge collected from every corner of the known world. But what made Alexandria truly unique was not just the volume of knowledge. It was the system behind it. Ships arriving at the port were searched. Any books found were taken, copied, stored, and sometimes the originals were kept. Think about that. A place so determined to collect knowledge that it actively absorbed it from travelers, from merchants, from anyone who carried written information. It was not just a library, it was an engine of knowledge accumulation, and within its walls, some of the greatest minds in history worked. Euclid developed the foundations of geometry. Archimedes explored principles that would influence science for centuries. Eratosthenes calculated the size of the earth with astonishing accuracy. This was not passive knowledge. This was active discovery. And then, something began to happen. The story of the library's destruction is not simple. There is no single moment, no definitive event, no clear answer. One of the earliest accounts points to Julius Caesar. During his campaign in Alexandria in 48 BC, fires broke out in the city. Some sources suggest that these fires may have reached parts of the library, destroying sections of its collection. But this was not the end, because the library continued to exist in some form. Over the centuries, Alexandria changed. Political power shifted, religious influence grew, and the library began to decline. During the reign of Emperor Aurelian, parts of the city were destroyed in conflict. Later, under Theodosius I, pagan institutions were suppressed, temples closed, structures dismantled, and somewhere within these changes, the remnants of the library faded. There is also the story of the Serapeum, a temple complex that may have housed a secondary collection of texts. When it was destroyed, many believe that whatever remained of the library was lost. But here is the problem. None of these events provide a complete explanation, because the destruction of the Library of Alexandria was not a single act. It was a process, a gradual erosion of knowledge, through war, through neglect, through transformation, which makes the mystery even deeper. Because when something is destroyed slowly, parts of it often survive. So where are they? Where are the missing scrolls, the lost works, the knowledge that once filled its halls? Some historians believe that much of the knowledge was simply lost, destroyed beyond recovery, gone forever. But others suggest something different, that pieces of the library may have survived, hidden, moved, preserved in unexpected places. There are theories that scholars, sensing the decline of Alexandria, may have taken texts with them, carrying knowledge to other regions, to Rome, to Byzantium, to Persia. If true, then the library did not disappear completely. It dispersed. Fragments of its knowledge may exist today, scattered across different traditions, embedded in later discoveries, unrecognized for what they truly are. And then there are more intriguing possibilities. In the 18th century, in the ruins of Herculaneum, archaeologists discovered carbonized scrolls, burned, damaged, but still present. Some believe these scrolls may be connected to the knowledge networks of the ancient world, possibly even linked to Alexandria. Modern technology has begun to reveal their contents. Slowly, carefully, and what they contain is still being uncovered, which raises a possibility. What if other collections exist, still buried, still hidden, waiting to be found? Because history has shown us something important. Knowledge rarely disappears completely. It survives in fragments. in copies, in translations, in ideas that outlive their original form. But there is also another possibility, one that is harder to prove. What if some knowledge was intentionally lost, not destroyed by accident, but removed? Because not all knowledge is harmless. Some ideas challenge power, some discoveries disrupt systems, some truths are inconvenient. Could it be that certain texts were never meant to survive? It's a difficult idea, but not impossible. Even today, information can be controlled, restricted, hidden. So what about then? The Library of Alexandria represents more than just a loss of books. It represents a loss of potential. What could have been discovered sooner? What ideas might have changed history? What knowledge did we lose that we don't even realize we lost? Because that is the most unsettling part. We don't know what we're missing. There could have been scientific principles ahead of their time, medical knowledge lost for centuries, philosophical ideas that could have reshaped civilizations, and we would never know. Standing in the absence of the library, we are left with fragments, echoes, hints of something much larger, a place that once held the world's knowledge, now reduced to mystery. And perhaps that is why the Library of Alexandria continues to fascinate, because it represents something we still strive for: understanding, connection, the desire to know everything, and the realization that we may never be able to. Somewhere in the past, there was a moment when humanity came closer than ever, and then it slipped away, not with a single flame, but with time. And in that slow disappearance, a question remains. Was it truly lost? Or is it still out there, in pieces, waiting to be found? The book no one can read. There are books that teach, books that record history, books that preserve knowledge, and then there are books that refuse to be understood, not because they are damaged, not because they are incomplete, but because no one has ever been able to read them. Not linguists, not historians, not the most advanced cryptographers in the world. For over a century, one manuscript has resisted every attempt to decode it, every theory, every method, every possible explanation. And with every failed attempt, the mystery only deepens, because this is not just an unreadable book. It is something far more unsettling. A book that appears deliberate, structured, meaningful, and yet completely beyond comprehension. It is known today as the Voynich manuscript, and everything about it raises questions. The manuscript first came to public attention in 1912, discovered by a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich, hidden within a collection at a Jesuit college in Italy. At first glance, it looked like any other old book: aged pages, handwritten text, illustrations scattered throughout. But the moment researchers began to examine it, they realized something was wrong. The writing made no sense, not just difficult to read, not obscure, but completely unknown. The characters did not match any known language, not Latin, not Greek, not Arabic, not any documented script in history, and yet it didn't look random. The text followed patterns, repeated structures, consistent rules. It behaved like a real language, but one that no one could identify. Carbon dating later revealed something even more intriguing. The manuscript was created in the early 15th century, around 1404 to 1438. This was not a modern hoax. It was genuinely ancient, and yet no one knows who wrote it, or why. The pages are filled with strange illustrations, plants that do not exist, or at least cannot be identified. They resemble real plants, but only partially, as if they were drawn from memory, or imagination, or something else entirely. There are also diagrams, circular patterns, star-like formations, symbols that suggest astronomy, or astrology, or something more complex. And then there are the figures, human forms, often depicted in unusual positions, sometimes interacting with strange structures, sometimes immersed in what appear to be liquid-filled environments. Nothing is clearly explained. Nothing is labeled in any recognizable way. Everything feels intentional, but nothing makes sense. Over the years, countless attempts have been made to decode the manuscript. Some of the greatest minds in cryptography have tried. Even codebreakers from NSA examined it. Experts who have solved some of the most complex codes in modern history, and yet they failed. Every method has been applied: frequency analysis, pattern recognition, statistical modeling, artificial intelligence, and still no translation. Some researchers believe the manuscript represents a lost language, a system of writing that has no surviving relatives. If true, then the manuscript could be the only remaining example of that language, a single artifact from an entire system of communication that disappeared. Others suggest it is a cipher, an encrypted text designed to conceal its meaning. If so, then it is one of the most sophisticated codes ever created, because it has resisted decryption for over a century. There is also the possibility that it was created as a form of intellectual exercise, a complex puzzle, designed to challenge, to confuse, to test the limits of understanding. But this raises a question. Why go to such lengths? Why create an entire manuscript, complete with illustrations, just to hide meaning? Then there is the theory that the manuscript is meaningless, a hoax, an elaborate fabrication, created to deceive. But this idea faces a problem, because the text is too consistent, too structured, too complex. Random writing does not behave this way. It lacks patterns, it lacks coherence. The Voynich manuscript has both, which suggests something important. There is meaning. We just don't understand it. And that leads to a more unsettling possibility. What if the manuscript was never meant to be read by us? What if it was created for a specific group, a specific audience, people who understood its symbols, its structure, its logic? If that's the case, then we are looking at something incomplete, not because it is missing pages, but because we are missing context. Without context, even the simplest message becomes impossible to understand. There are also theories that the manuscript relates to alchemy, a field that combines science, philosophy, and mysticism, practiced in secrecy, passed down through coded texts. If the Voynich manuscript is an alchemical document, then its strange illustrations may not be literal. They may be symbolic, representations of processes, of transformations, of ideas that cannot be expressed directly. This would explain the plants, the diagrams, the unusual figures. But it still doesn't explain everything, because even symbolic systems follow rules, patterns that can eventually be understood, and yet, this one remains locked. Some researchers have proposed that the manuscript may not originate from Europe at all, that it could be influenced by knowledge from the Byzantine Empire, or the Middle East, or even further east. If true, then the manuscript could represent a fusion of ideas, a system created at the intersection of cultures. There are also more speculative ideas, that the manuscript contains knowledge ahead of its time, information that could not be understood when it was written, and perhaps still cannot be fully understood now. It's a bold claim, but not impossible. History has shown that knowledge can appear out of place, concepts that seem too advanced, ideas that don't fit their time. Could the Voynich manuscript be one of those cases, or is it something else entirely? Because there is one final possibility, one that is rarely discussed. What if the manuscript is not meant to convey information, but to obscure it? A distraction, a decoy, a text designed to appear meaningful, while hiding something else. If that's true, then the real question is not what the manuscript says, but what it hides. Even today, the Voynich manuscript remains unsolved. No confirmed translation, no definitive explanation, no agreement among experts. And yet, it continues to draw attention, to inspire investigation, to challenge understanding, because it represents something fundamental: the limits of knowledge. In a world where information is increasingly accessible, where answers are often just a search away, this manuscript stands as a reminder that some things remain beyond reach, not because they are impossible, but because we are missing something, a key, a perspective, a piece of understanding that has not yet been discovered. And until that moment comes, the manuscript remains silent, not empty, not meaningless. but waiting for someone, somewhere, to finally understand it. Or perhaps to realize that it was never meant to be understood at all. The empire that chose a different god. There are moments in history where entire civilizations change direction, not slowly, not gradually, but suddenly. A shift so unexpected that even centuries later we still struggle to explain it. A kingdom surrounded by powerful empires, caught between competing religions, forced to choose a path. And instead of following either side, they chose something else, something rare, something almost unprecedented. An entire ruling class turning toward a faith that was neither dominant nor politically advantageous, a decision that would define their identity and leave behind one of history's most puzzling questions. Why? In the vast region between Europe and Asia, near the shores of the Caspian Sea, there once existed a powerful state, a civilization that controlled key trade routes, a bridge between worlds. Known as the Khazar Empire. At its height, the Khazars were a formidable force. They commanded armies, controlled commerce, maintained influence across vast territories. They stood between two major powers. To the south, the expanding Islamic caliphates. To the west, the Byzantine Empire, two dominant forces, two major religions, Islam and Christianity. Most civilizations in this position would have aligned with one side, adopted one belief system, secured alliances, strengthened their political standing. But the Khazars did something unexpected. They chose neither. Instead, they turned to Judaism, not partially, not symbolically, but at the highest levels of power. The ruling elite, the royal family, adopting a faith that was not dominant in their region, not backed by a major empire, not politically advantageous in any obvious way. This was not just unusual. It was almost unheard of. So why did they do it? The most widely accepted explanation comes from historical correspondence, accounts that describe a moment of decision, a debate, a choice between three major religions. According to these sources, the Khazar ruler invited representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Each presented their beliefs, each argued for their truth, each offered a path. The Christian envoy spoke of the power of the Byzantine Empire, of divine authority, of established tradition. The Muslim representatives emphasized the strength of the caliphates, the unity of their faith, the rapid expansion of their influence. And then the Jewish scholars presented something different, a faith that had survived without empire, without dominance, without political control, a religion rooted in endurance, in resilience, in identity. According to the story, the Khazar ruler asked a simple question. Between Christianity and Islam, which religion is closer to the truth? Both sides answered the same, Judaism. And with that, the decision was made. It's a powerful story, logical, symbolic, almost poetic, but there's a problem. We don't know if it's true. The historical evidence is limited, fragmented, uncertain. We have references, mentions, accounts written after the fact, but no definitive proof of how the decision was actually made. And that opens the door to other possibilities, because religion in history is rarely just about belief. It is also about power, position, strategy, survival. From a political perspective, the Khazar decision makes a different kind of sense. By choosing Judaism, they avoided aligning fully with either of their powerful neighbors. They remained independent, neutral, distinct, not Christian, not Muslim, something else entirely. This allowed them to maintain balance, to trade with both sides, to navigate a complex geopolitical landscape. But even this explanation feels incomplete. Because adopting a religion is not a small decision. It affects culture, law, identity, daily life. And yet, we don't fully know how widespread the conversion was. Did the entire population convert, or just the elite? Did they follow Jewish practices strictly, or adapt them to fit their existing traditions? There is evidence suggesting that the adoption of Judaism may have been limited, that the ruling class embraced it, while the general population remained diverse. If true, then the conversion was less about religion and more about identity. A way to define the ruling class, to create a distinction, to unify leadership under a shared belief. But even this raises more questions, because the Khazar Empire eventually declined. By the 10th and 11th centuries, it had faded from power, conquered, absorbed. Its influence diminished, and with its decline, the traces of its unique religious identity became harder to track. What happened to the Jewish Khazars? Did they integrate into other Jewish communities? Did they disperse across regions? Did they leave behind a legacy we have yet to fully understand? Some theories suggest that they contributed to the development of Jewish populations in Eastern Europe, that their influence may still exist, hidden within cultural or genetic traces. Others reject this idea, arguing that the evidence is inconclusive, that the connection is uncertain, and so the mystery remains, because we are left with fragments, clues, pieces of a story that does not fully come together, an empire that made an unusual choice, a decision that defies simple explanation, and a question that continues to linger. Was it belief? Was it strategy? Or was it something else entirely? Because history often presents events as clear, as logical, as understandable. But sometimes, the deeper you look, the less clear things become. The Khazar conversion is one of those cases. A moment that should be easy to explain, but isn't. A decision that changed an empire, but left behind no definitive reason, and perhaps that is what makes it so compelling. Because it challenges our assumptions. It reminds us that not all decisions are obvious, not all choices are predictable, and not all mysteries have answers. Some remain open, unresolved, waiting for new evidence, new perspectives, new understanding. Or perhaps they remain unsolved, because the answer is more complex than we are ready to accept. The swords that should not exist. There are objects in history that don't just survive. They challenge what we think we know, artifacts that seem out of place, too advanced, too refined, too precise for the time they were created. And when we examine them closely, we are left with a question that refuses to go away. How? In the cold landscapes of medieval Europe, among the remains of warriors, battlefields, and forgotten graves, a series of swords were discovered. At first glance, they appeared ordinary. Long blades, simple hilts, weapons designed for war. But then, researchers noticed something unusual. An inscription, stamped into the metal. A name, repeated across multiple blades. Ulfberht. These were not just swords. They were something else entirely, because unlike other weapons of their time, these blades were different, stronger, lighter, more durable, and made using a method that should not have been possible in Europe at that time. The Ulfberht swords have been found across a wide region, from Scandinavia to Central Europe, dating back to between the 9th and 11th centuries, the height of the Viking Age. This was a time when metallurgy was still developing. Iron was commonly used, but it was often impure, filled with slag, weak, inconsistent. Creating a strong sword required skill, careful forging, repetition. But even then, the results were limited. And yet, the Ulfberht swords stand apart. When modern researchers analyzed their composition, they found something unexpected. High-quality steel, with very low levels of impurities. This type of steel requires extremely high temperatures to produce. Temperatures that, according to conventional understanding, were not achievable in Europe at the time. So how were these swords made? One theory suggests that the steel was imported, that raw materials came from regions where advanced metallurgy already existed, possibly from the Middle East, or even India, where crucible steel, also known as Wootz steel, was being produced. If this is true, then the Ulfberht swords were not just weapons, they were products of global trade, evidence of connections between distant civilizations. But there's a complication. Not all Ulfberht swords are the same. Some are made with this high-quality steel, others are not. Some are clearly superior, others are imitations, which raises an important question. What does the name Ulfberht actually represent? Was it a person, A master blacksmith? A craftsman whose work became legendary? Or was it something else? A brand? A symbol? A mark of quality? If it was a name, then who was Ulfberht? No definitive records exist, no confirmed identity, just the inscription, repeated, recognizable, mysterious. And then there's another detail, the inscription itself. Some of the swords feature slight variations, misspellings, differences in spacing, in form. This suggests that not all of them were made by the same source. Some may have been copies, attempts to replicate the original, to capitalize on its reputation. But those copies lack something. They lack the quality, the precision, the material, which means the true Ulfberht swords were something rare, something difficult to reproduce. And that brings us back to the central mystery. If these swords required advanced techniques, where did that knowledge come from? Was it imported, learned through trade, passed down from another culture, or was it developed independently? If it was imported, then there must have been a supply chain, a connection, a network. But evidence of such a system is limited. If it was developed locally, then it suggests something even more surprising, that European smiths had access to techniques that we did not think existed at the time. And then there is another possibility, that the knowledge was temporary, discovered, used, and then lost, because after a certain point, the production of true Ulfberht swords stops. The high-quality versions disappear. Later swords bearing the same name do not match the originals. It's as if something changed, as if the knowledge required to produce them vanished. And this is not unique in history. There are other examples. Techniques that appear and then disappear. Knowledge that exists briefly and then is forgotten. But why? Why would something so valuable, so effective, be lost? Was it because the craftsman died, the knowledge not passed on? Was it because the materials became unavailable, trade routes disrupted? Or was it because the process itself was never fully understood? Perhaps it was a combination, a fragile system, dependent on specific conditions, specific people, specific knowledge. And when those conditions changed, the system collapsed. There's also a more speculative idea, that the Ulfberht swords were not just technological anomalies, but cultural ones, symbols of status, of power, of connection. Owning one was not just about having a better weapon, it was about possessing something rare, something exceptional, and that rarity made them valuable. Even today, when these swords are examined, they continue to raise questions. Modern technology can replicate their quality, but understanding how they were made, within the context of their time, remains challenging, because history does not always preserve process, it preserves results. We see what was created, but not always how, and sometimes that how is the most important part. Standing between what we know and what we can prove, the Ulfberht swords remain suspended, artifacts that suggest that our understanding of the past may not be complete, that there were connections we have not fully mapped, techniques we have not fully understood, stories we have not fully uncovered, and perhaps that is the real mystery, not just how the swords were made, but what they represent, a glimpse into a world more complex than we imagine, a reminder that history is not always linear, that progress can appear and disappear and disappear, that knowledge can rise and then fade, leaving behind only fragments and questions, because sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are not about what we find, but about what they force us to reconsider. And the Ulfberht swords do exactly that. They don't just cut through metal, they cut through certainty, leaving us with one final question. What else have we misunderstood? The grave that held a king, or something more beneath quiet fields and open skies, there are places where history waits, not in books, not in records, but buried, silent, preserved beneath layers of earth. And sometimes, when those places are uncovered, they don't just reveal the past, they challenge everything we thought we understood about it. In the English countryside, in a region that appears calm, almost ordinary, there lies one of the most extraordinary discoveries ever made. A burial, not just of a person, but of power, of identity, of something that still refuses to be fully explained. It is known as Sutton Hoo. And at first, there was nothing remarkable about it. Just a series of mounds, gentle rises in the landscape, easily overlooked until 1939. That year, an archaeologist named Basil Brown began excavating one of the mounds. What he found beneath it was unexpected. A ship, not on water, not preserved in a harbor, but buried, over 80 feet long, its shape still visible in the soil. The wood itself had decayed, but its imprint remained, a ghost of a vessel, frozen in the earth. And at its center, something even more extraordinary, a burial chamber, filled with objects of incredible detail, incredible craftsmanship, incredible significance. This was not an ordinary grave. This was a statement. Gold, silver, weapons, armor, jewelry, artifacts that spoke of wealth, power, and connection to distant lands. Among them was a helmet, intricately designed, decorated with patterns and figures. Unlike anything else found in England at the time, there were also objects that suggested contact with faraway regions, items that could be traced to the Byzantine Empire, to Scandinavia, to places far beyond the local landscape, which raised an immediate question: who was buried here? The scale of the burial suggested royalty, a king, a ruler of immense importance. The most commonly proposed identity is Raedwald, a powerful king of East Anglia in the early 7th century, a leader known for his influence, his wealth, his position at a time when England was undergoing transformation. But there is a problem. There is no body, no skeletal remains, no clear physical evidence of the person buried, only objects, only symbols, only presence, without a confirmed identity. This absence is unusual, because burial sites typically preserve something: bones, fragments, evidence. But here, there is nothing. Which leads to a question that has puzzled researchers for decades. Was this truly a burial, or something else? One explanation suggests that the acidic soil dissolved the remains, that over time the body simply disappeared. It's a reasonable theory, supported by the chemistry of the region, but it doesn't explain everything, because the absence of a body changes the nature of the site. It transforms it from a burial into something more symbolic, a monument, a statement of power. The ship itself adds another layer to the mystery. Ship burials were not entirely unknown in this period. They appear in Scandinavian traditions, often associated with high-status individuals. The ship represents a journey, a passage, a transition from life to whatever comes next. But the scale of Sutton Hoo is different, larger, more elaborate, more deliberate. This was not just about burial. This was about legacy, about sending a message to the living, and perhaps to something beyond. The arrangement of the objects suggests intention, careful placement, meaning behind positioning. This was not random, this was designed, and that design reflects something important, a moment in history where cultures were changing. The early Anglo-Saxon period was a time of transition, pagan beliefs beginning to encounter Christianity, old traditions meeting new ideas, and Sutton Hoo seems to exist at that intersection. Some elements suggest pagan practices, the ship, the grave goods, the symbolism. Others hint at Christian influence, subtle, indirect, but present, which raises another question. Was this burial meant to reflect both worlds? A ruler positioned between two belief systems, honoring the past while acknowledging the future? If so, then Sutton Hoo is not just a grave, it is a snapshot of transformation, a moment when identity itself was shifting. But there are also more unusual theories. Some suggest that the burial was not for a specific individual, but for an idea, a representation of kingship, of authority, of power beyond a single person, a symbolic burial. Others propose that the site may have had a ritual purpose, a place where ceremonies were performed, where meaning was constructed, where the boundary between life and death was explored, because the absence of a body allows for interpretation. It opens the possibility that the burial was never meant to hold one, that it was always meant to be something else. A monument, a ritual space, a statement. And then there is the broader context. Sutton Hoo is not isolated. There are other mounds, other sites, other traces of activity, which suggests a larger system, a network of practices, of beliefs, of traditions. And Sutton Hoo may be one piece of that system, a central point, a focal location. But without complete records, without written explanations, we are left to interpret, to analyze, to question. Even with modern archaeology, advanced tools, detailed analysis, the mystery remains, because not all questions can be answered through excavation. Some require context, understanding, perspective, and when that context is missing, the past becomes uncertain. Sutton Hoo gives us objects, details, clues, but it does not give us certainty, and perhaps that is what makes it so powerful, because it reminds us that history is not always clear, that even the most significant discoveries can leave us with more questions than answers. Standing above the burial site today, there is a sense of stillness, a quiet awareness that something important happened here, something deliberate, something meaningful, but something we do not fully understand. Was it a king? Was it a symbol? Was it something else entirely? The ship remains, the artifacts endure. But the truth remains buried, and until it is uncovered, Sutton Hoo will continue to stand as one of history's most intriguing mysteries. A grave that may hold a king, or something far more complex. The fire that still burns in the decked. There are mysteries that fade with time, questions that slowly find answers, secrets that, eventually, are uncovered. And then, there are those that refuse to disappear. Stories that remain unresolved, events that seem to defy explanation no matter how much we study them. One such mystery begins in a remote mountain pass, a place isolated, cold, unforgiving, a place where nature alone is dangerous enough. And yet, what happened there cannot be explained by nature alone. In the winter of 1959, a group of experienced hikers set out on an expedition. They were skilled, prepared, familiar with harsh conditions. This was not their first journey. They were led by a young man named Igor Dyatlov, and their destination was a remote region of the Ural Mountains, a place later known as Dyatlov Pass. The journey began normally. The group moved steadily, following their planned route, documenting their progress. Everything appeared routine, until it wasn't. When the group failed to return, search teams were sent out, and what they found was disturbing. The tent. It had been abandoned, but not in a normal way. The fabric was cut open from the inside, not torn by wind, not damaged by animals, but deliberately cut, as if the people inside had chosen to escape as quickly as possible. Without using the entrance, outside the tent, footprints led away into the snow, barefoot or wearing only socks, in freezing temperatures. At night, this alone made no sense. But what came next made even less. The bodies were found scattered, some near a tree line, others further away. Some had died from hypothermia, but others showed injuries that were far more severe: crushed ribs, fractured skulls, injuries described as comparable to a high-impact collision. And yet, there were no external wounds, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of another group, no footprints besides their own. And then, there was something else. One of the bodies was missing a tongue. Another showed signs of unusual radiation. Clothing containing levels of contamination that could not be easily explained. At this point, the mystery had already become unsettling. But the more investigators looked, the stranger it became. Official reports concluded that the group died due to a compelling natural force. But what does that mean? What kind of natural force causes people to cut their way out of a tent, run into freezing darkness, and suffer injuries that resemble violent impact, without any visible cause? Over the years, many explanations have been proposed. One of the most widely accepted theories involves an avalanche, a sudden movement of snow, forcing the group to evacuate their tent. It explains the urgency, the escape, the panic. But it does not explain everything, because the slope where the tent was found was not steep enough for a typical avalanche. There was no clear evidence of one, and the injuries did not match what would normally be expected. Another theory suggests a rare phenomenon known as a katabatic wind, powerful, sudden gusts, descending from higher elevations, strong enough to create fear, to destabilize the environment, to force evacuation. But again, it doesn't explain the injuries, the radiation, the missing tongue. Some have suggested infrasound, low-frequency vibrations capable of inducing panic, disorientation, fear. Could the hikers have experienced something that caused irrational behavior? Possibly, but this still leaves unanswered questions, because panic alone does not produce broken bones. And then, there are the more controversial theories. Military testing. Some believe the group may have stumbled into a secret experiment, weapons testing, explosions, unknown technology. This could explain the injuries, the radiation, the lack of external evidence. But there is no definitive proof. Others suggest something even more unusual, that the hikers encountered something not fully understood. Strange lights were reported in the sky around the time of the Mecca, the Bengal, Mecca. Witnesses described glowing orbs, moving silently, unexplained. Coincidence or connected? There are also theories involving unknown natural phenomena, forces we do not yet fully understand, interactions between environment, pressure, and sound, conditions that could create effects beyond normal experience. But again, nothing explains everything. Each theory solves part of the puzzle, but leaves something out. And that is what makes this case so enduring, because it resists a single explanation. It exists in fragments, pieces that do not fully connect, details that refuse to align. Even decades later, with modern analysis, reconstructed simulations, scientific investigation, the mystery remains, because at its core, this is not just a question of what happened. It is a question of understanding, of how much we truly know about the world. Because events like this challenge assumptions. They remind us that there are limits to knowledge, to explanation, to certainty. Standing in that frozen landscape today, it is quiet, still, unremarkable. And yet, something happened there, something that left behind evidence, but no clear story. A moment that began like any other journey, and ended in confusion, in fear, in silence. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part. Because whatever happened, happened quickly, unexpectedly, and left no clear trace of its cause, only questions. And those questions remain. What made them leave the tent? What caused the injuries? What led to their final moments? And why, after all this time, do we still not know? Some mysteries fade. This one does not. It remains, frozen, like the landscape where it occurred, unchanging, unresolved, waiting for an answer that may never come. Where things disappear. There are places on Earth where the rules seem different, not dramatically, not obviously, but just enough to make people question what they're seeing. Places where instruments fail, where signals vanish, where entire ships and aircraft disappear. And among all of these locations, one stands out above the rest. A stretch of ocean that has become synonymous with mystery. A region where countless stories have emerged, some explained, others not. A place known as the Bermuda Triangle. And for decades, it has been associated with one question. What is happening there? The Bermuda Triangle is not marked on official maps. It has no clear boundaries, but it is generally considered to lie between 3 points: Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. An area of open ocean, busy with traffic, crossed by ships and planes daily. At first glance, there is nothing unusual about it, and yet stories began to emerge, reports of vessels found abandoned, aircraft that vanished without distress calls, crews that disappeared without explanation. One of the most well-known incidents occurred in 1945. A group of 5 U.S. Navy planes on a routine training mission, known as Flight 19, experienced pilots, clear instructions, a familiar route. And then, something went wrong. Radio communications became confused. Pilots reported that their instruments were malfunctioning, that their compasses were no longer reliable. They spoke of being lost, disoriented, unsure of their position. And then, silence. The planes never returned. A rescue aircraft sent to search for them also disappeared. No wreckage, no debris, no definitive explanation. Incidents like this fueled speculation because they suggested something unusual, something beyond ordinary navigation error. Over time, more stories surfaced: ships found drifting with no crew, planes vanishing mid-flight, signals lost without warning. Each case adding to the narrative that this region was different. Scientists and researchers have proposed many explanations. One of the simplest is human error. The ocean is vast. Navigation can be complex. Weather conditions can change rapidly. Mistakes happen, and in many cases they do. But this explanation doesn't satisfy everyone, because some incidents involve experienced crews, modern equipment, conditions that should not have led to disappearance. Another theory involves natural phenomena, magnetic anomalies. The Earth's magnetic field is not uniform. There are variations, areas where compasses may behave differently. Could this explain navigation errors? Possibly, but magnetic variation is known, mapped, accounted for. It does not fully explain sudden loss of contact. Then there is the possibility of underwater features. The ocean floor beneath the Bermuda Triangle is complex, deep trenches, sudden drop-offs. Methane gas has also been suggested as a factor. Large releases of methane from the ocean floor could reduce water density, causing ships to lose buoyancy. At the same time, gas rising into the atmosphere could affect aircraft engines. It's a compelling theory. But again, it does not explain everything. Because not all incidents occur under the same conditions. Not all involve ships, not all involve aircraft, and not all have evidence of gas release. Weather is another factor. The region is prone to sudden storms, hurricanes, rapidly changing conditions. These can be dangerous, unpredictable. But modern forecasting has improved, and yet reports continue. Then there are the more unconventional ideas. Time distortion. Some pilots have reported experiencing unusual phenomena, moments where time seemed to shift, where distances did not match expectations. These accounts are anecdotal, difficult to verify, but they persist. There are also theories involving unknown forces, electromagnetic disturbances, unexplained energy fields, concepts that move beyond established science. And then there are the most extreme suggestions that the Bermuda Triangle is connected to something hidden, lost civilizations. Some believe the legendary city of Atlantis may lie beneath these waters, and that remnants of its technology still affect the region. It is a bold idea, unsupported by evidence, but it continues to appear in discussions. Because the mystery invites speculation, it creates space for possibilities, even those that seem unlikely. There is also the role of perception. Stories attract attention. Attention amplifies stories. Over time, certain regions become associated with mystery, and that association grows. The Bermuda Triangle is one of those regions, a place where unexplained events are remembered, while ordinary ones are overlooked. But this does not mean that all incidents are easily explained, because some remain unresolved. Cases where evidence is limited, details unclear, outcomes uncertain, and it is within those gaps that the mystery continues. Even today, the Bermuda Triangle remains active. Ships cross it, planes fly over it. Most journeys are uneventful, but the stories remain, persistent, compelling, because they tap into something deeper, the unknown. The idea that there are places on Earth where our understanding is incomplete, where things happen that we cannot fully explain, And perhaps that is what gives the Bermuda Triangle its power, not just the incidents, but the uncertainty, the lack of clear answers. Because in a world where so much is mapped, measured, understood, there is something compelling about a place that resists explanation. A region that reminds us that not everything is known, not everything is predictable, and not everything can be controlled. So what is the Bermuda Triangle? A natural phenomenon? A collection of unrelated incidents? A misunderstood region shaped by narrative? Or something else? Something we have yet to fully understand? The answer remains uncertain, and perhaps that is what keeps the mystery alive. Because as long as there are questions, there will be stories. And as long as there are stories, the Bermuda Triangle will remain, a place where things disappear, and where answers are just out of reach. The signal that should not exist. There are sounds that belong to the natural world. Wind moving across open land, waves crashing against the shore, the distant rumble of thunder. And then, there are sounds that don't seem to belong anywhere. Signals that appear without warning, messages that appear without a clear source, and patterns that suggest something intentional. In the vast silence of space, humanity has been listening for decades, scanning frequencies, searching for anything that might indicate we are not alone. And in 1977, for just 72 seconds, something answered. It came from deep space, a signal unlike anything detected before, strong, clear, precise, not random noise, not interference, but something structured, something that stood out immediately. The signal was detected by a radio telescope at Big Ear Radio Telescope, a facility dedicated to scanning the sky for unusual radio emissions. That night, the data printed onto paper, as it always did, rows of numbers and letters, representing intensity, frequency, signal strength. But one sequence caught attention. 6EUJ5A pattern so unusual that the astronomer reviewing the data circled it and wrote a single word beside it. Wow. The name stayed, the wow signal. It lasted only 72 seconds, and then it was gone. Never detected again. Despite repeated attempts, repeated scans, repeated searches, nothing. No repetition, no follow-up, no confirmation. Just a single moment, a signal that appeared and disappeared. So what was it? The frequency of the signal was significant. It was close to the hydrogen line, a specific radio frequency associated with hydrogen atoms. Why does that matter? Because hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. If a civilization wanted to send a signal to be detected by others, this would be a logical frequency to use, a kind of universal marker. Which raises a question. Was the signal natural? Some scientists suggest it could have been. A rare cosmic event, a burst of energy, a phenomenon we don't fully understand. But the structure of the signal doesn't quite fit. It was narrow band, highly focused. Natural sources typically produce broad signals, spread across frequencies. This one did not. It was precise, which suggests artificial origin. But if it was artificial, who sent it? And why only once? Because one of the most puzzling aspects of the wow signal is its singularity. Signals intended for communication are usually repeated, sent multiple times, at regular intervals, to ensure detection, to confirm presence. But this signal was never repeated, which makes interpretation difficult. Was it a one-time event, a transmission that was not meant for us, or something else entirely? There have been attempts to explain it. One theory suggested it could have come from a comet, hydrogen clouds surrounding a comet, emitting radio waves, but later analysis showed problems with this explanation. The intensity, the structure, the characteristics of the signal did not match. Other theories involve satellites, human-made interference, but again the frequency and pattern do not align with known sources, and so the signal remains unexplained, which places it in a unique category. Not confirmed as extraterrestrial, but not explained as natural, a possibility, suspended between answers, and that is where it has remained, for decades, because without repetition, Without additional data, we cannot confirm anything. We can only speculate, and speculation leads to questions. What if the signal was intentional? A message, a transmission from another civilization, not directed specifically at Earth, but passing through, detected by chance, a brief intersection between two distant points in space. If so, then the implications are enormous, because it would mean we are not alone, that somewhere beyond our reach there are others, but without confirmation, it remains a possibility, not a conclusion. There is also another perspective. What if the signal was not meant to be repeated? What if it was a test, a probe, a single transmission sent to see if anyone was listening? And if no response was received, there was no reason to continue. It's a speculative idea, but not impossible, because communication requires two sides, sending and receiving. If one side does not respond, the exchange ends. There is also the question of timing. The universe is vast. Distances are immense. Signals take years, decades, even centuries to travel. So what we detected in 1977 may have been sent long before, from a source that may no longer exist, or may still be active, but far beyond our current ability to detect again. Even today, efforts continue. Projects scanning the skies, listening, searching, looking for patterns, for repetition, for confirmation. But the wow signal remains unique, a single data point, unmatched, unrepeated. And that is what makes it so compelling, because it represents a moment, a brief connection, between us and something unknown, whether natural, artificial, or something we have yet to understand. It challenges assumptions, it raises possibilities, and it reminds us that the universe is far larger, far more complex than we can fully comprehend. Standing beneath the night sky, looking at distant stars, it is easy to feel alone. But then, there is that signal, those 72 seconds, that pattern, that anomaly. And suddenly, the question changes, not whether we are alone, but whether we are listening carefully enough. Because the universe may not be silent. We may simply not understand what it is saying, and somewhere, among countless stars, there may be other signals, waiting, passing through space, unnoticed, until one day we hear them, and this time we understand. Or perhaps we don't, because understanding is not guaranteed, and the wow signal remains a reminder of that, a message without a translation, a signal without a source, a mystery still echoing through space. The map that should not exist. There are discoveries that expand our understanding of history, and then there are those that challenge it entirely. Artifacts that don't just add new information, but force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew, because sometimes something appears that seems out of place, out of time, too accurate, too detailed, too advanced for the era it came from. And when that happens, the question is not just how it was made, but how it could have existed at all. In 1929, inside the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a fragment of an ancient map was discovered. At first glance, it appeared to be just another old chart, hand-drawn, decorated, marked with notes and symbols, but as researchers began to study it, they noticed something unusual. The map depicted coastlines, not roughly, not symbolically, but with a level of detail that seemed unexpected. It showed parts of Europe, Africa, and most intriguingly, South America. This alone was not extraordinary. By the early 16th century, maps of these regions did exist, but this map was different because of how it was drawn. The proportions, the shapes, the alignment, they suggested a level of accuracy that should not have been possible at the time. The map was created by Piri Reis in 1513, an experienced navigator, a skilled cartographer. But even with his expertise, there was something about the map that didn't quite fit, because Piri Reis himself claimed that he did not create it from scratch. Instead, he compiled it, using multiple source maps, some of which were said to be ancient, lost, unavailable to us today. According to his notes, some of these sources dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, which raises an immediate question. What kind of maps existed that long ago, and how accurate could they have been? Because when modern researchers examined the Piri Reis map, they noticed something else. The coastline of South America appeared remarkably precise. Not perfect, but far more accurate than expected for 1513, and then came the most controversial observation. Some interpretations suggest that the map shows parts of Antarctica, specifically a coastline that appears to match the region beneath the ice. This is where the mystery intensifies, because Antarctica was not officially discovered until the 19th century, and even then, mapping its coastline required advanced exploration. And yet, some believe this map contains a representation of it. If true, it would suggest something extraordinary. That knowledge of Antarctica existed centuries before its official discovery, or even more unsettling, that the coastline was mapped before it was covered in ice. But this idea is highly debated. Many experts argue that the supposed Antarctic section is simply a distorted representation of South America, a misinterpretation, a coincidence, and yet the discussion continues, because the map contains enough unusual details to keep the question open. There are also technical aspects that raise curiosity. Some researchers have suggested that the map uses projections that resemble modern mapping techniques, methods that account for the curvature of the Earth, techniques that were not widely understood at the time. If this is accurate, then it suggests that Piri Reis was working with knowledge that was more advanced than expected. But again, there is no definitive proof, only interpretation, only analysis, and the possibility that we are missing part of the story. Because the most important detail may not be the map itself, but its sources, the maps that Piri Reis used, many of which no longer exist, lost to time, destroyed, or simply never preserved. If those maps were real, then they represent a level of knowledge that we no longer have access to. And that raises a deeper question. How much knowledge has been lost? How many discoveries were made, recorded, and then forgotten? Because history is not just a record of what survives, it is also a record of what disappears. And sometimes, what disappears is more important than what remains. The Piri Reis map is a fragment, a piece of something larger, a glimpse into a system of knowledge that we do not fully understand. It suggests that there were sources, methods, information that existed beyond what we currently recognize, and whether those sources were ancient or simply lost remains uncertain. There is also the question of interpretation. How much of what we see in the map is actually there, and how much is shaped by our expectations, because humans look for patterns, connections, meaning. Sometimes we see what we want to see, but sometimes there really is something unusual, and distinguishing between the two is not always easy. Even today, the Piri Reis map continues to be studied, analyzed, debated. Some view it as an impressive example of early cartography. Others see it as evidence of lost knowledge, and a few see something even more extraordinary. But regardless of interpretation, the map raises important questions about history, about knowledge, about what we truly understand. Because if accurate information existed earlier than we thought, then our timeline changes. If advanced mapping techniques were used before we believed possible, then our assumptions shift. And if knowledge can be lost, then what we know today may only be a fraction of what once existed. Standing in front of that map, looking at lines drawn centuries ago, there is a sense of curiosity, not just about what it shows, but about what it represents. A connection to something beyond our current understanding. A reminder that history is not complete, that there are gaps, missing pieces, unanswered questions. And sometimes, those questions appear in unexpected places, like a map, a simple object that quietly suggests that the past may be more complex than we imagine. And that somewhere, in the spaces between what we know and what we don't, there may be answers, or even more mysteries, waiting to be uncovered. The coda hidden in stone. There are messages that are meant to be read, clear, direct, understood by anyone who sees them. And then, there are messages designed to be hidden, encoded, concealed within symbols, patterns, and structures, not meant for everyone, not meant for immediate understanding, but waiting for the right eyes, for the right moment, for someone to finally see what has always been there. Across ancient landscapes, on monuments, temples, and forgotten ruins, there are markings that seem deliberate, precise, repeated, symbols carved into stone, patterns etched into surfaces, alignments that appear too intentional to be accidental, and yet, many of them remain undeciphered, because they do not behave like ordinary writing. They do not follow known languages, they do not translate easily, and they do not reveal their meaning without resistance. One of the most intriguing examples comes from a civilization that flourished thousands of years ago, a culture known for its architecture, its engineering, its ability to shape stone with remarkable precision. The ancient Egyptians, among their many achievements, they left behind a system of writing, hieroglyphs. For centuries, these symbols remained a mystery, until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, a single artifact containing the same text written in 3 different scripts. This allowed scholars to finally decode hieroglyphs, to understand what had been hidden for so long. But here is where the story becomes more complex, because not all symbols were translated, not all markings were explained. Even after the Rosetta Stone, there are still inscriptions, still patterns, still alignments that remain unclear, because not everything was meant to be read in a straightforward way. Some messages were layered, symbolic, multidimensional. Take the pyramids, massive structures built with astonishing precision, aligned with cardinal directions, positioned in ways that suggest deeper meaning. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most studied structures in history, and yet, questions remain. Why is it aligned so precisely with true north? How were its stones cut and placed with such accuracy? And perhaps most intriguingly, does it contain hidden information? Some researchers believe that the pyramids encode knowledge, not in the form of written language, but through structure, through proportion, through alignment, mathematical relationships embedded in stone, ratios that correspond to natural constants, patterns that reflect astronomical observations. If true, then the pyramids are not just tombs, they are messages. But messages that require interpretation, messages that do not reveal themselves easily. There are also other sites, other structures, where similar questions arise. In Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars stand in circular arrangements, carved with symbols, animals, abstract shapes, dating back over 11,000 years, far older than expected for such complexity. And yet, we do not fully understand their meaning. Were they religious, symbolic, a form of communication, or something else entirely? Because the symbols do not form a clear language. They suggest meaning, but do not define it, which leaves interpretation open. And then there are alignments. Structures positioned in relation to stars, to solstices, to celestial events, across different civilizations, across different time periods. Similar patterns emerge. Precision, repetition, intent, as if there was an understanding of the sky that was deeply integrated into construction. But why? Why encode information in stone? Why create structures that align with celestial bodies? Why embed meaning in patterns, instead of writing it directly? One possibility is permanence. Stone endures, paper decays, language changes, symbols evolve, but structures remain. If a message needed to survive for thousands of years, stone would be the medium. Another possibility is selectivity. Not everyone would understand such messages, only those with the right knowledge, the right perspective, the right tools. This creates a filter, a way of controlling who can access the information. Because understanding becomes a process, a journey, and only those who complete that journey reach the meaning. There is also the idea of layered knowledge, information hidden within information, a surface meaning, and a deeper one, accessible only when certain conditions are met. This concept appears in many ancient traditions, where knowledge is not given freely, but revealed gradually. and always protected, because knowledge has power, and power is rarely shared without limits. Some researchers have suggested that certain ancient sites may contain encoded scientific knowledge, astronomical data, mathematical principles, information that was preserved in symbolic form, not because it could not be written, but because it needed to endure, to survive beyond language, beyond culture, beyond time itself. And if that is true, then what we see today may only be the surface, the visible layer, of something far more complex, because decoding such information requires more than translation. It requires interpretation, understanding, context, and context is something we often lack. We are separated from these civilizations by thousands of years, their beliefs, their knowledge, their intentions, not fully preserved, which means we are trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. And yet, we continue to try, because the possibility is too compelling to ignore. That somewhere, hidden in stone, there are messages, waiting, not forgotten, but unread, because the difference is important. Forgotten means gone, unread means still there, still present, still accessible, just beyond understanding. And perhaps that is where these ancient codes remain, not lost, but waiting, for a moment, when someone sees them differently, when patterns become clear, when symbols connect, when meaning finally emerges. Until then, they remain silent, not empty, but unresolved. A reminder that not all knowledge is easily revealed, and that some messages are meant to last, even if they are never fully understood. The disaster that should not have happened. There are disasters in history that we understand, events caused by natural forces, mistakes, failures that can be traced, analyzed, and explained. And then, there are those that leave behind something else: confusion, contradictions, details that don't quite fit, a sequence of events that, even when reconstructed, feels incomplete. In the summer of 1908, in one of the most remote regions on Earth, something exploded. Not a small event, not a localized incident, but a blast so powerful, it flattened forests across thousands of square kilometers. Trees were knocked down in a radial pattern, as if something had exploded above them. The shockwave was felt hundreds of miles away. Windows shattered, ground trembled. People reported a bright flash in the sky, followed by a thunderous explosion. This event would later be known as the Tunguska explosion. It occurred near the Tunguska River, in a region of Siberia that was largely uninhabited, which is the only reason it did not become one of the deadliest disasters in history. But what happened there remains one of the most puzzling mysteries in modern science, because despite the scale of the explosion, there is something missing: a crater. In most impact events, a meteor or asteroid strikes the ground, creating a crater, leaving behind fragments, evidence. But in Tunguska, there was none. No impact site, no clear debris, just flattened trees, burn marks, and a pattern of destruction that suggested something exploded in the air. An airburst. The most widely accepted explanation is that a meteor entered the Earth's atmosphere, traveling at high speed, and exploded before reaching the ground, releasing energy equivalent to a large nuclear explosion. This theory explains many aspects of the event: the absence of a crater, the radial pattern of destruction, the reports of a bright object in the sky. But it does not explain everything, because the details are not entirely consistent. The direction of the blast, the pattern of fallen trees, the lack of substantial meteorite fragments, all raise questions. And then there are the eyewitness accounts, descriptions of the event that vary. Some reported a blue or white light, others described a fiery object, some heard multiple explosions, others only one. These differences are expected in chaotic events, but they add to the uncertainty, because they make reconstruction more difficult. There are also reports of strange atmospheric effects. In the days following the explosion, the night skies across Europe were unusually bright, People could read newspapers outdoors at midnight. Clouds glowed, as if something in the upper atmosphere had changed. This suggests that material was dispersed at high altitudes, reflecting sunlight, but again, the exact mechanism remains uncertain. And then there are the more unusual theories. Some suggest that the explosion was not caused by a meteor, but by a comet, a body composed largely of ice, which would explain the lack of solid debris, because it would vaporize upon explosion. This theory has gained some support, but it still leaves questions about the energy release, the specific patterns of destruction. Others have proposed even more unconventional explanations. That the event was caused by a natural gas explosion, methane released from beneath the Earth's surface, igniting. But the scale of the explosion makes this unlikely. And then there are the most speculative ideas. That the Tunguska event was not natural at all. That it was the result of an unknown technological event. An explosion not caused by space debris, but by something else. Some have even suggested connections to early experiments, theories involving energy transmission, uncontrolled reactions. Ideas that move far beyond conventional science. But there is no solid evidence to support them. And so, the meteor airburst remains the leading explanation. But even within that framework, there are uncertainties. Because we do not have direct evidence, we have reconstruction, models, simulations, all based on limited data, and that is what makes Tunguska so intriguing, because it is a modern mystery, an event that occurred within recorded history, documented, observed, and yet not fully understood. Even today, expeditions continue to study the site, analyzing soil, vegetation, patterns of destruction, looking for clues, looking for confirmation. But definitive answers remain elusive, because the event left behind evidence, but not enough. Fragments of a story without the full narrative, and that is where it remains. Between explanation and uncertainty, because Tunguska reminds us of something important, that even in the modern era, with science, with technology, with data, there are still events that challenge our understanding, that do not fit neatly into models, that resist complete explanation. And perhaps that is what makes them so compelling, because they reveal the limits of knowledge. They show us where understanding ends and mystery begins. Standing in that remote region of Siberia today, the forest has regrown, trees have returned, the landscape appears normal. But beneath that surface, there is a history, an event that changed everything in a single moment, and left behind questions that remain unanswered. What exploded? How exactly did it happen? And why, after more than a century, do we still not know for certain? Some mysteries are ancient, lost to time. But Tunguska is different. It is recent, and still unresolved. A reminder that not all mysteries belong to the distant past. Some happen within reach, and still remain beyond understanding. The eve of history, or the beginning. There is a moment in every mystery where the questions begin to change. At first we ask simple things. What happened? Where did it occur? Who was involved? But the deeper we go, the more those questions evolve. They become something else, something larger, something more difficult to answer. Because eventually, every mystery leads to the same place, us, our understanding, our limits, our assumptions about the world we live in. Because the truth is, the past is not as clear as we think. It is not a complete record, not a perfect timeline, not a fully understood sequence of events. It is fragmented, pieces scattered across time, some preserved, some lost, some hidden, and everything we believe we know is built from those fragments, from discoveries, interpretations, connections we attempt to make. But what if those connections are incomplete? What if the story we have constructed is only part of a much larger picture? Because throughout history, we have encountered things that don't quite fit, a fire that could not be extinguished, a weapon that burned on water, a land discovered and then abandoned, a city that may exist but cannot be found, a civilization that rose to incredible heights and then quietly disappeared, a library that held knowledge beyond imagination, only to be erased, a manuscript no one can read, a king who may have ruled, but may never have existed, swords made with techniques ahead of their time, structures carved into the earth with precision that challenges explanation, a grave that holds no body but immense meaning, a signal from space that appeared once and never again, a map that suggests knowledge we may not fully understand, codes hidden in stone, a disaster without a clear cause. Each of these mysteries stands on its own, separate, independent, but when viewed together, they begin to form something else, a pattern, not a clear one, not a defined one, but a suggestion. That history is not as simple as we imagine, that knowledge is not always preserved, that progress is not always linear, because we tend to think of time as a straight line, advancing, improving, building upon itself. But what if that's not entirely true? What if knowledge can be lost? Not gradually, but suddenly. What if entire systems of understanding can disappear, leaving behind only fragments? Fragments that we rediscover and mistake for something new, because this has happened before. Ideas that appear ahead of their time, techniques that seem too advanced, concepts that don't align with what we expect, and each time we are forced to reconsider, to question, to look again. Because the past may not be behind us in the way we think. It may be layered, complex, containing moments of advancement, followed by loss, discovery, followed by disappearance, and if that is true, then what we call history may be incomplete, not wrong, but unfinished. And that raises a deeper question. What are we missing? What knowledge existed that no longer does? What discoveries were made and then forgotten? What systems were understood and then lost? Because if even a fraction of that is true, then the world we see today is not the result of continuous progress, but of cycles. Cycles of understanding and cycles of loss. There is also another possibility, that some knowledge was not lost by accident, but intentionally, hidden, renewed, preserved in ways we do not yet recognize, because knowledge is power, and throughout history, power has always been controlled, restricted, protected, so it is not impossible that certain ideas, certain discoveries, were never meant to be widely known. But if that is the case, then where are they? Where would such knowledge be kept? In texts, in structures, in symbols, or in something else entirely? Because if we look closely, we begin to see something interesting. Patterns. Connections between seemingly unrelated mysteries, shared themes, loss, disappearance, unexplained precision, unresolved questions, and perhaps these are not coincidences. Perhaps they are signals, not in the sense of communication, but in the sense of direction, pointing us toward something we have not yet fully understood, because the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. And that realization is not a weakness, it is a beginning. Because every unanswered question creates the possibility of discovery. Every mystery opens a door. Every gap in knowledge invites exploration. And perhaps that is the true purpose of these mysteries, not to be solved completely, but to push us forward, to challenge assumptions, to expand understanding, to remind us that certainty is temporary and curiosity is essential. Standing at this point, looking back at everything we've explored, there is no single answer, no unified explanation, no moment where everything suddenly becomes clear. And maybe that's exactly how it should be, because history is not a puzzle with a final piece. It is a process, an ongoing attempt to understand, to connect, to interpret. And as long as there are mysteries, that process continues. So the question is no longer what happened, or where, or how, but something else entirely. What are we still missing, and what happens when we finally find it? Because the end of one mystery is often the beginning of another, and history is full of beginnings, waiting for us to notice, for us to question, for us to continue the search, because the story is not over. It never was. And perhaps it never will be. The truth we are not seeing. There is something unsettling about unanswered questions, not just the mystery itself, but the feeling that comes with it. A sense that something is missing, something just beyond understanding, something we almost see, but never fully grasp. Because throughout history, we have searched for answers, relentlessly, across continents, across centuries, across every field of knowledge we have created, and yet some questions remain. Not because they are impossible, but because we may be asking the wrong ones. Think about it. Every mystery we have explored, we approached the same way. What is it? How was it made? Why did it happen? Logical questions. Necessary questions, but limited questions, because they assume something important, that the mystery exists within our current understanding, that it can be explained using the same framework we already have. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if some mysteries are not meant to fit within what we already know? Because there is a pattern, one that becomes clearer the more closely you look, not in the details of each mystery, but in what they all have in common. They resist explanation, not completely, but just enough to remain open, enough to avoid closure, enough to stay alive, because once something is fully understood, it stops being a mystery. And once it stops being a mystery, it stops being pursued. But these remain. And that raises a different kind of question. What if that is the point? Not to be solved, but to remain unsolved. Because unresolved mysteries do something powerful. They keep us searching. They push us forward. They force us to question assumptions. They expand the boundaries of what we consider possible. And without them, progress slows. Curiosity fades. Understanding becomes static. So what if these mysteries are not failures of knowledge, but drivers of it? Because every time we encounter something unexplained, we react in a specific way. We investigate, we analyze, we attempt to understand. And in doing so, we discover new things, not always about the mystery itself, but about the world around it, and about ourselves. Because the search for answers is not just about information, it is about perspective, about how we interpret reality, how we define what is possible, and how we respond when something challenges that definition. Take a moment and consider something simple. How many things in history were once considered impossible? Flight, electricity, the idea that the Earth orbits the sun. All of these were once beyond belief, and yet they became understood, accepted, normal. So what about the mysteries we face now? The ones that still feel out of place, too advanced, too precise, too unexplained. Are they truly impossible? Or simply not yet understood? Because there is a difference, a critical difference. Impossible means it cannot be explained. Not yet understood means it can be explained, just not yet. And history shows us something important. The boundary between those two ideas is always moving. What seems impossible today may become obvious tomorrow. And what seems mysterious now may one day be clear. But until that moment comes, the mystery remains. And that is where we are. In a moment of uncertainty, standing between what we know and what we don't. And in that space, anything is possible. Because uncertainty is not emptiness, it is potential. Potential for discovery. Potential for understanding. Potential for something entirely new. And perhaps that is what makes these mysteries so powerful. Not the answers they withhold, but the possibilities they create. Because every unanswered question is an invitation to look deeper, to think differently, to challenge what we believe. And in doing so, we move forward, not just as individuals, but as a civilization. Because progress does not come from certainty. It comes from questioning it. And the more we question, the more we uncover. Even if the answers are not immediate, even if the path is unclear, even if the mystery remains, So perhaps the goal is not to eliminate mystery, but to embrace it, to understand that not knowing is not a weakness, it is a beginning, because every discovery in history started with a question, and every question started with something unexplained. So what we are seeing now is not the end of understanding, it is the continuation of it, an ongoing process, a search that does not stop, and may never stop. Because the more we learn, the more there is to learn. The more we discover, the more there is to discover. And the more mysteries we solve, the more new ones appear, which means there may never be a final answer, no ultimate conclusion, no point where everything is fully understood. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Because if everything were known, there would be nothing left to explore, nothing left to question, nothing left to discover. And without that, we would stop moving forward. But we are not there, not even close. Because the world is still full of mysteries, some ancient, some modern, some just beginning to reveal themselves, and all of them waiting, not just for answers, but for attention, for curiosity, for someone willing to look deeper, because the truth is not always hidden. Sometimes it is simply overlooked, and the moment we begin to see differently, everything changes, not just what we understand, but how we understand it. And that is where the real journey begins, not in the answers we find, but in the questions we continue to ask. Because as long as there are questions, there will always be more to discover. And as long as there is more to discover, the story is not over. It is only just beginning. At the end of every journey, there is usually an answer, a conclusion, a moment where everything becomes clear, where the pieces come together, where the mystery is finally resolved. But this is not one of those journeys, because what we've explored was never meant to end with certainty. It was never meant to give you a single answer. Instead, it leaves you with something else, a feeling, a quiet realization that the world is far more complex than it appears, because we began with questions, simple ones. What happened? How is it possible? Why does it remain unexplained? And along the way, those questions changed. They became deeper, less about the mysteries themselves and more about what they reveal, about history, about knowledge, about the limits of what we understand. Because each mystery was not just an isolated event, it was a signal, a moment where reality did not behave as expected, a point where certainty broke down and something else took its place, uncertainty. And that uncertainty is not empty, it is full of possibility, because uncertainty is where discovery begins. It is where assumptions are challenged, where new ideas emerge, where understanding evolves. And without it, there is no progress, because progress does not come from knowing everything. It comes from realizing that we don't, and that realization is powerful. It changes the way we see the world. It shifts perspective. It opens doors we didn't even know existed. Because when something doesn't make sense, we have two choices. We can ignore it, or we can investigate it. And history has shown us that the second choice changes everything. Every major discovery, every breakthrough, every shift in understanding started the same way, with something that didn't fit, something that didn't align with existing knowledge, something that forced people to ask, what if we're wrong? And that question is where everything begins. Because being wrong is not failure. It is opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to adapt, to expand what we know. And the mysteries we've explored all carry that same opportunity. They are not obstacles. They are invitations. Invitations to look closer, to think deeper, to question more. Because the moment we stop questioning is the moment we stop discovering. And discovery is what defines us as individuals, as a species. It is what drives us forward, from the earliest civilizations to the present moment. The desire to understand, to explore, to find meaning in the unknown. And that desire has never disappeared. It has only grown. Because the more we learn, the more we realize how much remains. Unexplored, unanswered, unseen. And that is not something to fear. It is something to embrace, because the unknown is not an end. It is a beginning, a space filled with potential, a place where new ideas can emerge, where new discoveries can be made, where the next chapter of understanding is waiting. And perhaps that is the most important realization of all, that we are not at the end of knowledge. We are at the edge of it, standing at a boundary that is constantly moving, expanding, growing. And every time we reach that edge, we push it further, not by having all the answers, but by asking better questions, because better questions lead to better understanding, and better understanding leads to something even greater: perspective, the ability to see the world differently, to recognize patterns, to connect ideas, to understand not just what is happening, but why it matters. And that is where true discovery lies, not just in facts, but in meaning. Because facts can be recorded, but meaning has to be understood. And understanding takes time. It takes effort. It takes curiosity. And above all, it takes the willingness to accept that we do not know everything. Because the moment we believe we do, we stop looking. And when we stop looking, we stop finding. So as this journey comes to an end, there is no final answer, no single explanation, no moment of complete clarity. And that is not a flaw. It is the point, because the goal was never to solve every mystery. It was to show you that the mysteries exist, that they matter, and that they are still waiting. Waiting to be explored, waiting to be understood, waiting for someone to ask the next question, and that someone could be anyone. Because discovery is not limited to experts. It is not confined to laboratories or institutions. It begins with curiosity, with a simple thought, a question that refuses to go away. And from that question, everything else follows. So as you leave this moment, consider this. What is the one question that stays with you? The one that lingers? The one that doesn't quite let go? Because that question is where your journey begins, not here, not in what you've just seen, but in what you choose to explore next, because the story is not over. It never was, and it never will be. As long as there are questions, there will always be more to discover. And as long as there is more to discover, the search continues, not just out there, but within. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not what we are trying to understand, but why we keep trying. Before you go, there's something you should understand. What you've just experienced was not just a story. It was a journey, through questions, through uncertainty, through moments that don't quite fit into what we call reality. And if you're still here, still watching, still thinking, then something happened, something subtle, a shift. Because this kind of content doesn't just give you information. It changes the way you see things. It makes you notice details you would normally ignore. It makes you question things you would normally accept. And most importantly, it makes you curious. And curiosity is where everything begins. Because the people who change the way we understand the world are not the ones who accept easy answers. They are the ones who ask better questions. The ones who look deeper, the ones who don't stop when something doesn't make sense. And right now, you're one of them. Because you stayed. You followed the ideas. You explored the unknown. You allowed yourself to think beyond what is obvious, and that matters. More than you think. Because most people don't do that. Most people scroll. They move on. They forget. But you didn't. You're still here. Which means you're already different. And this channel is built for people like you. People who don't just want surface-level information. People who want depth, mystery, meaning. People who want to explore ideas that are not always easy to explain, because the truth is, there is so much more out there. More mysteries, more questions, more stories that haven't been fully understood, and we're only just getting started. There are things we haven't explored yet, lost civilizations that don't fit the timeline, artifacts that challenge everything we believe, events that were recorded but never explained, and questions that are still waiting for attention, waiting for intention, waiting for investigation, waiting for someone to care enough to look deeper. So if this kind of journey, if this way of thinking, if this feeling of curiosity is something you want more of, then there's only one thing left to do. Stay connected, because every video we create is another step into the unknown. Another layer uncovered, another question explored, and if you leave now, you might miss something important, not just another story, but another perspective, another way of seeing the world, and sometimes that's all it takes. One idea, one question, one moment of realization. That changes everything, so don't let that moment pass. If you haven't already, take a second and make sure you don't miss what comes next, because the next mystery is already waiting, and it might be the one that stays with you, the one that lingers, the one that keeps you thinking long after the video ends. And those are the ones that matter most, because they don't just entertain you, they stay with you. They become part of how you see things, how you think, how you question. And once that happens, you don't go back. You don't see the world the same way again. And that's the point. Not just to show you something new, but to change the way you look at everything. Because once you start noticing, you can't stop. You begin to see patterns, connections, details that were always there, but never fully understood. And that's when things get interesting. Because that's when you move from watching to thinking, from observing to questioning, from consuming to exploring. And that shift is where real discovery begins. So if you've made it this far, don't stop now. This is just the beginning. There are more stories, more mysteries, more moments that will challenge what you think you know, and you don't want to miss them. Because the next one could be the one that changes everything. And if you're still here, still reading, still thinking, then you already know. You're not here by accident. You're here because something about this resonates. And that's exactly why you should stay. Because this is not just content. It's a journey. And once you start it, there's no real ending. Only more questions and more answers waiting to be found. So take that next step and be part of what comes next. Because the story continues, and you're already a part of it. At the end of everything we've explored, there is a silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from absence, but the kind that follows something meaningful. A pause, a moment where the mind lingers, because what you've just seen was never meant to give you certainty. It was meant to do something else. It was meant to leave you thinking. Because the deeper we go into history, the more we begin to notice something unusual, not just in the mysteries themselves, but in the way they exist. They don't disappear. They don't resolve completely. They remain, unfinished, as if they are waiting for something, or someone, because every mystery carries a kind of tension, a pull, something that draws attention, something that refuses to be ignored. And that tension comes from one simple fact. We don't fully understand it. And as long as we don't understand it, it stays alive. Because understanding brings closure, and closure ends the search. But what we've seen doesn't offer closure. It offers something else. Possibility. The possibility that what we know is not complete. That what we believe may not be final. And that what we see as history may only be part of the story. Because history is not a perfect record. It is not a continuous narrative. It is a collection of fragments, preserved, lost, rediscovered, reinterpreted. And every time we uncover something new, we don't just add to the story. We change it. We reshape it. We see it differently. And that process never really ends. Because the past is not fixed. It is constantly being revealed. Piece by piece. Through discoveries. through questions, through moments where something doesn't quite fit, and those moments are the ones that matter most, because they are the ones that challenge us, the ones that force us to stop, to look again, to ask, is this everything, or is there more? Because there is always more. There are always layers beneath what we see, depth beneath what we understand, and meaning beneath what we recognize. But reaching those layers requires something. It requires curiosity, not passive curiosity, active curiosity, the kind that doesn't accept easy answers, the kind that doesn't stop at the surface, the kind that continues, even when things become unclear, even when the answers are not immediate, because real understanding doesn't come quickly. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes the willingness to remain uncertain. And that is not easy, because uncertainty is uncomfortable. It creates tension, it leaves space where answers should be. But that space is where discovery happens. It is where new ideas emerge, where new perspectives form, where the boundaries of knowledge expand. And every mystery we've explored exists within that space, not fully known, not fully unknown, but somewhere in between. And that is what makes them powerful, because they exist at the edge of understanding, at the point where knowledge meets possibility, and possibility is where everything begins. Because before something is understood, it is imagined. Before it is proven, it is questioned. Before it becomes fact, it exists as uncertainty, and that uncertainty is not a weakness. It is a starting point, a foundation for exploration, a reason to continue searching. And that search is something we have always done. From the earliest civilizations to the present day, we have looked beyond what we know. We have asked questions about things we don't understand. We have tried to make sense of the unknown. And in doing so, we have changed the world. Because every discovery started as a mystery, something unexplained, something that didn't fit, something that forced someone to ask, what is this? And that question is still being asked right now, in countless places, across different fields, different disciplines, different perspectives, because the unknown is not limited. It exists everywhere, in the past, in the present, and even in the future, because the future itself is unknown, unwritten, full of possibilities we cannot yet imagine, and that makes it a mystery, just like everything else. So when we look back at history, we are not just looking at what happened, we are looking at what remains, what was left behind, what survived, and what didn't. Because what didn't survive may be just as important. The lost knowledge, the missing pieces, the gaps in understanding. All of these shape the way we see the past, and the way we see the present, because what we don't know influences what we think we do. It creates assumptions, fills in gaps, builds narratives, and sometimes those narratives are incomplete, not wrong, but incomplete. And that is where the opportunity lies, because incomplete understanding means there is more to discover, more to question, more to explore, and exploration is what drives everything forward. Not certainty, not conclusions, but curiosity. The desire to know more, the willingness to look deeper, the ability to accept that we don't have all the answers, and that's okay, because not having all the answers means there is still a reason to search, still a reason to learn, still a reason to keep going, and that is what this journey has been about, not finding final answers, but understanding the value of the questions, because the questions are what lead us forward. They guide us, they challenge us, they push us beyond what we think we know. And every time we follow them, we discover something new. Not always what we expected, but something valuable, something that adds to our understanding, something that changes the way we see things. And that change is what matters, because the world is not static, it is constantly evolving, and our understanding evolves with it. through questions, through exploration, through the willingness to go beyond what is comfortable. And that is not always easy, because stepping into the unknown requires letting go of certainty. It requires accepting that some things may not have immediate answers, that some mysteries may take time, or may never be fully resolved, and that can feel unsettling. But it can also be inspiring, because it means there is always more to discover, always more to learn, always more to understand. And that means the journey never ends. It continues through every question, every discovery, every moment of curiosity. Because as long as there are things we don't understand, there will always be a reason to keep searching. And that search is what defines us. Not the answers we have, but the questions we continue to ask. Because in the end, it's not just about what we find. It's about what we seek. And as long as we keep seeking, the unknown will never truly be out of reach. It will always be there, waiting, not as something distant, but as something just beyond understanding. Close enough to explore, but far enough to remain mysterious, and perhaps that is exactly where it belongs. Because if everything were fully understood, there would be no reason to continue, no reason to question, no reason to explore. But that is not the world we live in. We live in a world of mystery, of uncertainty, of endless possibility, and that means there is always more to discover, more to understand, more to question. And that is where the story continues. Not here, not at the end, but everywhere. In every question, every thought, every moment of curiosity. Because the unknown is not something we leave behind. It is something we carry with us. And as long as we do, the search never ends. It only evolves. And perhaps that is the most important thing to remember, that this was never the conclusion. It was only a moment, a pause, before the next question begins.